Throughout the centuries, history has been written in stone, on parchment, and in silence. There are chapters that, despite the efforts of explorers, scholars, and archaeologists, remain shrouded in mystery. Places where traces vanish, civilizations disappear without explanation, tombs sealed with secrets that no mortal has been able to decipher. Why did some empires collapse overnight? What forgotten messages do the ruins submerged under the sea hide? And what forbidden truths lie? Buried, waiting to be discovered? Tonight, we will travel together through the darkest folds of history. We will delve into enigmas that defy logic, into mysteries that still resist the truth today. So make yourself comfortable, turn off the lights, and get ready to immerse yourself in unsolved historical mysteries. On a silent night in the year 453 AD, under the starry sky of the Pannonian Plain, where the winds blew freely over the vast expanses of grass and the horizon, seemed to disappear into nothingness, the great king of the Huns, Attila, closed his eyes forever. A leader feared from the borders of the Roman Empire to the farthest reaches of Asia, a warrior whose name was synonymous with destruction, and yet his death did not take place in the heat of battle or in a treacherous ambush. It happened in the privacy of his tent on his wedding night, and with it was born one of the most baffling mysteries of ancient history. The oldest accounts come to us from historians, such as Priscus of Pio and Jordanes. According to their chronicles, Attila was celebrating his marriage to a young woman named Ildiko. After a day of feasting and celebrations, the king, who appeared to be in good health, retired to rest. The next morning, his men found him dead, lying on his bed. There were no signs of a struggle or visible wounds, only a trail of blood that had flowed from his nose and mouth during the night, slowly suffocating him in his sleep. The official explanation was simple. Attila had died of massive nosebleeds, aggravated by drunkenness and his ignorance of the danger. An apparently accidental death. But could a man known for his strength and endurance fall victim to a simple nosebleed? Or are there darker reasons hidden behind the veil of this version? Some scholars have speculated that Attila may have suffered a sudden aneurysm or heart attack. The stresses of years of military campaigns, combined with excessive alcohol consumption, would have eventually broken even a body as hardened as his. This medical explanation, although plausible, does not satisfy all researchers. Other more disturbing hypotheses have emerged. One of them points to Hildiko, the young wife. Little is known about her origins, but some accounts suggest that she may have been a German princess offered to Attila as part of a pact or tribute. What if, instead of being a simple wife, she had been sent with a hidden purpose? What if the wedding night had been actually a silent ambush? The idea of murder is not far-fetched in the context of the time. Attila had made enemies everywhere, subjugated kings, ravaged peoples, and even Romans who, although they had showered him with tributes, longed for his demise. Poison administered in food or drink or a sneak attack during the night could easily have gone unnoticed amid the confusion of the celebrations. Other theorists go even further, suggesting conspiracies woven from the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. According to this view, the Martian emperor, eager to free his empire from the yoke of humiliating tributes, may have hatched a plan to eliminate the scourge of Rome in the cleanest way possible, without war, without armies, only through treachery. But if there was a murderous hand, its trail was lost forever. After Attila's death, his warriors, respecting an ancient ritual, performed secret funeral rites. It is said that his body was buried in a hidden place, in a triple coffin of gold, silver, and iron, and that the slaves who dug the grave were executed to ensure the eternal secrecy of his resting place. To this day, no one has ever found his grave. Did Attila die of natural causes, a victim of his own overwhelming strength? Or did he fall victim to a carefully orchestrated plot, sealed in the blood of a wedding night? And what truths, if any, remain buried alongside his body, hidden in the bowels of Central Europe? Perhaps. We will never know. Perhaps the fate of the king of the Huns is one of those enigmas destined to be lost in the mists of time. Join us as we continue to unearth the secrets of history. As we leave behind the ancient steppes where Attila fell, we now enter the thick, pulsating green jungle of Chiapas. There, among vines, ancient roots, and the eternal humidity of the living earth, stands the archaeological site of Palenque, a place where stone seems to breathe. Alongside the trees, and where each temple holds stories that time has failed to erase. In 1994, inside Temple 11 of Palenque, Mexican archaeologists made a discovery that shook the academic world. In a hidden burial chamber, sealed for more than 1,000 years, they discovered a sarcophagus covered by a thick layer of cinnabar, an intense red mineral considered sacred by the Maya. Inside lay the skeleton of a woman accompanied by elaborate offerings and two smaller skeletons, probably sacrificed in her honor. Her skin would once have been impregnated with the red dust of cinnabar, giving her a ghostly appearance, a red queen born of fire and the blood of the earth. Who was this woman who received such majestic funeral honors worthy of a monarch? Initial evidence suggested that she must have been a figure of the highest rank, perhaps a queen or a priestess of extraordinary power. But her name, unlike that of great rulers such as Pakel the Great, seemed to have been lost in the sands of time. A detailed study of her remains revealed some clues. The woman was between 50 and 60 years old when she died, an advanced age for the time, and her body showed signs of a comfortable life, with no traces of strenuous physical labor. Her teeth, carefully filed in ritual patterns, and the rich grave goods that accompanied her reinforced the idea of her high social status. However, there was no inscription on her tomb that could identify her with certainty. Some researchers proposed that she might be Zakbu Wayao, the principal consort of Pakel the Great, the mythical lord of Palenque. Married at an early age, Zakbu would have been a central figure in the political and religious alliances of her time, which would explain the respect and magnificence with which she was buried. This theory gained strength when DNA analysis indicated a possible family connection with Pakel, although not conclusive, but other hypotheses emerged, fueled by the mystery surrounding the site. Some argue that the Red Queen could have been a priestess of a forgotten cult, an intermediary between the world of men and the world of gods, whose true power lay in the occult. Cinnabar, with its inherent toxicity, would have served not only as a symbol of life and death, but also as a protective barrier between her spirit and that of the living. What if the Red Queen was not simply a historical figure, but part of a much older tradition, with roots still unknown? What if her burial, rather than a tribute, was an attempt to contain something that should not be awakened? The mystery deepens when considering the context of Palenque. At that time, the once vibrant and majestic city was beginning to decline. Political intrigue, climatic pressures, and social changes wove a veil of uncertainty over its future. Perhaps the Red Queen represented, in life or in death, a last attempt to invoke the favor of the gods, or to seal a pact that must not be broken. To this day, the tomb continues to raise more questions than answers. Each object found around it, necklaces, masks, sculpted figures, speaks of a dense, complex symbolism in which death and rebirth are intertwined. And yet, her true name and her complete story remain shrouded in the same intense red that protected her for centuries. Was she a forgotten queen, a priestess of unspeakable secrets, or the embodiment of a myth that we are only beginning to understand? What other chambers, what other hidden stories might still lie beneath the relentless jungle, waiting to be discovered? Perhaps, as so often happens in the mysteries of history, the Red Queen of Palenque is destined to remain on that threshold where certainty fades and only the echo of wonder remains. From the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, our journey now takes us to a very different landscape, the arid plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where desert dust covers the remains of civilizations that once ruled the world. Under the harsh sun of what is now Iraq lie the ruins of Nineveh, a city that was once the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire. Here, among mounds eroded by centuries and fragments of forgotten stone, lies one of the most enigmatic discoveries in history, the library of Ashurbanipal. It was in the 6th century BC when Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, ordered the creation of a vast collection of knowledge. More than 30,000 clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform script were gathered from palaces and temples, covering topics ranging from medicine and astronomy to magic, religion, and literature. Among them was one of humanity's literary gems, the Epic of Gilgamesh. But there is something strange about this story. Most of the tablets recovered explicitly mentioned Sarbanipal as their patron, proud of having preserved the knowledge of previous generations. And yet archaeologists have found evidence of another, earlier and more enigmatic collection, a nameless library without dedications, whose texts seem even older, more fragmentary, more obscure. What was this forgotten library? A private collection of forbidden knowledge? An archive of archaic texts that even the Assyrians considered ancestral? What is certain is that the nameless library seems to have been carefully protected and, at the same time, deliberately buried. Many of the texts show signs of intentional damage. Tablets have been broken, inscriptions erased, symbols scraped away until they disappeared. An act of censorship or perhaps desperate protection. The contents of these tablets raise further questions. Among records of transactions and chronicles of missing kings emerge spells, hymns to forgotten gods, and ritual formulas of uncertain origin. Some researchers have suggested that they could even date back to the Sumerians at such a remote time. Among the forgotten fragments of ancient Mesopotamia, another enigma emerges that invites us to look even further back in time. Beyond the greatness of Nineveh, beyond the exploits of Babylon, lie the dusty ruins of a place that, according to the most ancient traditions, was the first city built by mankind, Eridu. Today, the site of Eridu, in the southernmost part of what was once Sumer, near present-day Iraq, appears as a series of blurred mounds, covered in dust and silence. But, more than 5,000 years ago, this was a vibrant center of life and spirituality. Here, according to Sumerian royal lists, royalty descended from heaven for the first time. Here stood the temple of Enki, god of deep waters, wisdom, and creation. Eridu was not just a city, it was a symbol, the beginning of everything. Its spiritual importance resonated throughout Mesopotamian culture as an echo of even more ancient times. And yet, despite its mythical significance, Eridu disappeared. Its end was as silent as its origin had been glorious. What could have led to the abandonment of such a sacred place? Excavations begun in the 20th century have revealed that Eridu underwent numerous phases of construction and reconstruction. Each new temple was erected on the ruins of the previous one in a sequence that spanned centuries, but over time the city began to decline. Access to water, vital in a region where the desert could devour entire villages, became increasingly difficult. Changes in the courses of rivers, especially the Euphrates, drove away Eridu's sources of life, slowly condemning it to oblivion. For many archaeologists, this hydrological explanation is sufficient. The city died because its natural environment ceased to sustain it. But is it really that simple? Some Sumerian tablets offer a different version, mentioning cataclysms, floods, and divine decisions. According to myths, the gods themselves decreed the end of Eridu when its sacred purpose was fulfilled or betrayed. Are these just ancient metaphors to describe environmental changes, or are there other more complex factors at play? There is no shortage of speculation. Some theorists have raised the possibility of internal conflicts, power struggles that fragmented its population and forced them to disperse to new emerging cities, such as Ur and Uruk. Others point to a religious change. When the cult of Enki lost preeminence to other gods and new traditions, Eridu fell into disgrace, abandoned not only physically, but also spiritually. There are even those who suggest more daring hypotheses. What if Eridu was older than we think? What if its disappearance was not just a natural or political phenomenon, but the last gasp of an even more archaic civilization, whose vestiges we barely touch through Sumerian myths? The lack of clear documents about its case, the sudden void in its ceremonial activity, and the way its memory became shrouded in mythical narratives, fuel the feeling that Eridu holds secrets that we have not yet fully deciphered. Walking today among the silent mounds of Eridu is like walking on a palimpsest of forgotten memories, fragments of broken pottery, sun-baked bricks, remains of altars where offerings were once made to the sacred. Every grain of sand, every stone seems to whisper fragments of a story that refuses to be forgotten. Was Eridu simply a victim of inevitable geographical changes? Or does its fall signal the end of a much older cycle? A rupture that forever transformed the relationship between humans and the gods, with the earth and with themselves. The answer, if it exists, remains hidden beneath layers of earth hardened by millennia of silence. Perhaps somewhere among the ruins lies the key to understanding not only the disappearance of Eridu, but also the mystery of the very birth of civilization. While the sands of Eridu hide secrets from the dawn of civilization, in another corner of the world, centuries later, a mystery of a very different but equally puzzling nature arose. We now move to the green and peaceful lands of the English countryside, where history seems to whisper through the fields and forests. There, in the small, quiet village of Woolpit, in the county of Suffolk, one of the strangest episodes recorded in medieval Europe took place: the appearance of the Green Children. It was the 11th century, a time when superstition and wonder were intertwined with everyday life. According to the accounts of chroniclers such as Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, 2 children, a brother and sister, were found near wolf pits dug to protect livestock. Their appearance was disconcerting. They were dressed in clothes made of unknown fabrics. They spoke an unintelligible language, and, most strikingly, their skin was an intense green color. The villagers, amazed and fearful, took the children to the village. It is said that for days they refused to eat anything other than raw vegetables. Over time, adapting to their new environment, they began to eat other foods, and their skin color gradually faded to become closer to that of the local humans. Tragically, the younger child fell ill and died shortly thereafter. The girl, however, survived, learned the language, integrated into the community, and years later, according to records, married a man from Kingle in the neighboring county of Norfolk. When asked about her origins, her story was as intriguing as her mysterious arrival. She claimed that they came from a land called San Martin, a place of perpetual twilight where the sun never shone fully and the entire landscape was tinged with a strange green. She said that while they were tending their father's cattle, they heard a loud sound, like the ringing of large bells. They entered a cave, and after wandering around lost, they emerged in Woolpit. What explanation could there be for this story? Some historians have proposed rational theories. Perhaps the children were Flemish orphans, survivors of the civil wars that ravaged England at that time. Lost and malnourished, their strange language and greenish skin, the result of a nutritional deficiency, such as chlorosis, would have seemed extraordinary to the local peasants. Another hypothesis suggests that the children came from an isolated community in the dense forests of the region, where different traditions and dialects would have made them seem like strangers from another world. But even the most logical interpretations do not explain all the details of the story. The description of St. Martin's Land, bathed in twilight, and the idea of a journey through a cave evoke images that are more symbolic than literal. It could be an echo of ancient myths about parallel worlds or hidden realities preserved in popular memory. Looking through a more speculative prism, some have ventured to propose even more extraordinary interpretations, such as that the children could have come from an underground world or even from dimensions beyond our comprehension. These theories, although unlikely, reveal the enduring fascination that this case has held for generations of scholars and dreamers. The question remains open. Was the story of the Green Children true? Was it a true chronicle, a tale distorted by the passage of time, or a medieval metaphor for the fear of the unknown? Today, the village of Woolpit still exists with its centuries-old church and quiet country lanes, but beneath the serene appearance of the landscape, the echo of that ancient mystery still seems to linger. A memory of a day when the impossible broke through into the real world, leaving an indelible mark on England's oral history. Who were the green children of Woolpit, really? Lost children, orphans of a forgotten conflict, or messengers from a kingdom beyond our understanding? Perhaps, like so many other questions that time envelopes in its folds, the answer will remain forever hidden among the whispers of the English countryside. From the legend-shrouded fields of Woolpit, we now enter the damp and gloomy streets of an American city, where another enigma awaits in the shadows. Baltimore in the fall of 1849 was a place of cobblestone alleys, gas lamps flickering in the fog, and an atmosphere charged with melancholic mystery. It was there that one of the most enigmatic writers of all time met his tragic and baffling end, Edgar Allan Poe. On October 3rd, 1849, a worker named Joseph W. Walker discovered a man in a state of deep distress in front of Gunner's Hall Tavern. He was disoriented, dressed in clothes that did not belong to him, and could barely explain his situation. That man was Poe. For days later, after a delirious and feverish decline, he died at Washington College Hospital. He never regained enough lucidity to explain what had happened to him. Poe's death is shrouded in silence, gaps, and contradictions. The medical records of his stay in the hospital have been lost or, according to some, destroyed. The official cause of his death was never clarified, and contemporary accounts contradict each other on key details. Some speak of symptoms of alcoholism, others of poisoning epilepsy, a blow to the head, or even a political plot. What really happened in those dark days? One of the most widespread theories suggests that Poe was the victim of cooping, a fraudulent practice of the time in which criminal gangs kidnapped people, drugged or intoxicated them, and forced them to vote multiple times using different identities. The state in which Poe was found, confused, dressed in someone else's clothes, and located near a polling place, seems to support this hypothesis. However, there are dissenting voices. Some researchers have suggested that Poe may have suffered a physical collapse due to his well-known emotional fragility and underlying health problems. Others suggest that his condition was the result of an illness, tuberculosis, cholera, or even rabies. In 1996, a medical study proposed that Poe showed symptoms consistent with rabies, a disease that is difficult to diagnose in its final stages. Beyond medical explanations, even more disturbing theories persist. Some authors suggest that Poe was deliberately poisoned, perhaps as a result of a personal enmity or as revenge in a conflict of editorial interests. There are also rumors of a possible assault or conspiracy to prevent her imminent marriage to her childhood sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster. The very nature of his last days adds to the confusion. Witnesses reported that Poe repeated incoherent ramblings about a non-existent character named Reynolds, whose significance has never been fully deciphered. Others mentioned that he seemed to be running away from someone or something. Delusions of a sick man or fragments of a much darker story. The location also seems laden with meaning. Baltimore, a port city, with a gloomy atmosphere, becomes the perfect setting for an ending as foggy as Poe's literary life, marked by a constant exploration of death, madness, and the boundaries between reality and nightmare. Even his burial was shrouded in negligence and mystery. Initially buried in a modest, unadorned grave, his body was moved decades later under circumstances that some described as hasty and disrespectful. According to witness accounts, during the exhumation, a hard object was discovered moving inside his coffin, an anomaly that was never definitively explained. The image that remains is that of a genius lost in his own abysses, a victim of circumstances that defy logic and documentation. a tragic and deeply symbolic echo of the themes that permeated all his work. Did P die simply from a lethal combination of illness, negligence, and chance? Or does his death, like his most disturbing stories, conceal hidden layers of betrayal, fear, and fatality? Today, the mystery of Edgar Allan Poe remains open, like an unfinished story, like a door ajar to a world of shadows. And perhaps in the fog of those forgotten streets of Baltimore, the last verse that no one ever managed to write still whispers. From the misty streets of Baltimore, we now cross oceans and centuries to enter the heart of China, where another mystery carved in the same stone defies all explanation. We find ourselves in the province of Xi'an, in a small village called Shuyang Beikuan, in the district of Longyu. Here, beneath the surface of the earth, lies one of the most baffling archaeological discoveries of the modern world, the Longyu Caves. At first glance, the landscape is serene. Gentle hills, farmland, small lakes reflecting the sky. But beneath this peaceful appearance, hidden for millennia, lie vast underground chambers carved with a precision and effort that are still difficult to comprehend. In 1992, a group of villagers intrigued by deep pools that never seemed to dry up decided to pump the water out of one of them. What they found stunned everyone: an artificial cave of monumental proportions with sculpted walls, colossal pillars, and ceilings adorned with meticulous patterns. Soon, others were discovered. So far, at least 24 caves with similar characteristics have been found, all carved out of solid rock. The magnitude of the work is difficult to exaggerate. Each cavern occupies around 1,000 square meters with heights of up to 30 meters. The interior walls show uniform marks, as if an immense chisel had passed tirelessly over them, following parallel patterns that cover every visible surface. Who built these caves? How did they manage to excavate an estimated volume of more than 1 million cubic meters of rock, leaving hardly any debris or visible traces in the surrounding area? And why is there not a single mention of their existence in the historical records of the region? Archaeological studies suggest that the caves were carved more than 2,000 years ago, possibly during the Qin or Han dynasty. But this estimate does not solve the fundamental enigmas. No chronicle, no poem, no ancient document ever mentions a project of such magnitude, which, given its dimensions, would have required the mobilization of enormous human and material resources. Theories abound. Some propose that the caves may have served as refuges in times of war. Others suggest that they were underground quarries, although the meticulous ornamentation of the walls seems to contradict this hypothesis. There has also been speculation about ceremonial or religious purposes, perhaps linked to forgotten practices of local cultures that have since disappeared. And there are those who, looking even further afield, propose more radical possibilities. It could be the result of an advanced lost civilization whose knowledge of engineering surpassed that of their contemporaries. Or we are faced with a work whose original purpose was symbolic, intended to preserve perhaps some kind of spiritual legacy or ancestral secret. The construction of the Longyu Caves poses technical challenges that even modern technology would not easily solve. Excavating them without causing collapses, maintaining their internal symmetry, achieving the incredible uniformity of the walls. All this suggests planning and execution that seem incompatible with the known capabilities of the time. Added to this is the profound documentary silence, a work that in theory would have required the participation of thousands of people over many years left no trace in the written memory of humanity, as if its very existence had been destined from conception to remain hidden. What motivated such an undertaking? A secret refuge for an unknown elite, a sanctuary dedicated to forgotten deities, an architectural experiment lost in time, or perhaps an act of faith, a gigantic work with no practical purpose, built only to be seen by the eyes of the gods. Today, the Longyu Caves remain open to curious visitors. Their silent and solemn interiors invite reflection. The echo of footsteps on the carved floor seems to resonate not only in physical space, but in time itself, as if each cave were a whisper of something the modern world has not yet managed to decipher. Will we ever unravel the true story of the Longyu Caves? Or will they remain, like so many other forgotten wonders, a question suspended between memory and oblivion? While the silent chambers of Longju invite us to imagine forgotten civilizations, our journey now takes us to a much more unforgiving setting, the vast and desolate western desert of Egypt, an endless ocean of sand where dunes rise and fall like motionless waves under a relentless sun. There, in that realm of wind and silence, one of the greatest military forces of the ancient world was lost forever. The army of Cambyses II. The story begins in the year 524 BC, when Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great and Emperor of Persia, set out to conquer Egypt. After securing his dominion over the Nile, the ambitious Persian monarch turned his eyes to an even more remote goal, the mysterious oracle of Ammonius, located in the oasis of Siwa in the heart of the desert. According to Herodotus, Cambyses sent an expedition of 50,000 men to subdue the sanctuary and expand his spiritual and political control. But the army never reached its destination. Herodotus recounts that after marching for days under the scorching sun, the column was overtaken by a gigantic sandstorm, which, in an almost mythical act of nature, buried it forever beneath the dunes. Since then, the fate of the soldiers has remained a mystery. No human remains, weapons, or traces of camps have been found in the centuries since. Is it possible that an entire army disappeared without a trace? Some modern researchers have questioned the veracity of Herodotus' account. It could have been an exaggeration, a legend constructed to dramatize the dangers of the desert. They suggest that the expedition may have actually strayed off course, been wiped out by hostile tribes, or gradually succumbed to thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. The search for the lost army has obsessed explorers and archaeologists for generations. At the end of the 20th century, discoveries were announced that seemed to promise an answer. Tools, pottery shards, and human remains were discovered in remote areas of the western desert. Some media outlets proclaimed the mystery solved, but the enthusiasm soon faded. The objects could not be conclusively dated, and evidence of a massive military catastrophe remained elusive. The desert, in its infinite vastness, jealously guards its secrets. Beyond conventional explanations, alternative theories also exist. Some suggest that Cambyses underestimated the brutality of the environment, relying on guides who betrayed him or simply got lost in the labyrinth of shifting dunes. Others evoke the possibility of extreme weather events, sandstorms so dense and prolonged that they would have buried not only bodies, but all evidence of their existence. And as with many great mysteries, there is no shortage of bold hypotheses. Could the army have been the victim of some unknown geological phenomenon? A sudden fault in the ground, a massive collapse of dunes, a firestorm? Or perhaps, as some ancient accounts suggest, it was punished by supernatural forces for daring to desecrate a sacred site. Today, as the desert winds tirelessly shape the landscape, erasing the traces of the past as easily as they sculpt new forms, the fate of Cambyses' I's army remains one of history's most enduring enigmas. Every modern expedition that ventures into the desert in search of answers faces not only the harsh physical conditions of the environment, but also the unfathomable magnitude of time. For in the desert, the past does not disappear suddenly. It simply sinks layer by layer under centuries of oblivion. It was the Persian army devoured by the fury of nature. It was lost until it perished in oblivion. Or it still lies intact and hidden under miles of sand that no man has ever managed to cross. Perhaps one day the winds will change, and the desert, in an act of capricious generosity, will reveal what it has hidden for more than 2,000 years. Until then, The image of 50,000 men marching toward their eternal disappearance will continue to echo silently among the endless dunes. From the scorching Egyptian sea of sand, where an entire army disappeared without a trace, we now enter the silent passageways of another enigma born of the same land, the burial chambers of Deir el-Bahari, where the dead do not always rest in peace. There, among carefully mummified pharaohs and nobles, lies a figure that breaks all the rules of Egyptian funeral ritual, known as the unknown man or the screaming mummy, discovered in 1881 in the so-called cache of Deir el-Bahari. This mummy is unlike any other. While the bodies of the great figures of ancient Egypt lie serenely, carefully wrapped and protected, the unknown man presents a disturbing image. His face remains frozen in a gesture of agony, his mouth open in a silent scream, his head tilted back as if he had died in the midst of unbearable suffering. The body, instead of being meticulously embalmed and bandaged, was found wrapped in a rudimentary manner in sheepskin, a material considered impure by the Egyptians of the time. Furthermore, his burial was hasty and careless, without the magical protections or traditional offerings necessary to ensure passage to the afterlife. Who was this man condemned to an eternity of unrest? Forensic studies carried out in recent decades have revealed some details. He was a young man of around 18 to 20 years of age, healthy in life, who probably died violently. More recent examinations suggest that he may have been poisoned or suffocated, although there are no visible wounds to explain his terrible expression. Egyptian tradition considered eternal rest to be sacred. The entire mummification process was designed to ensure that the body and soul remain together, protected on their journey to the afterlife. Breaking these rituals was not a simple mistake. It was a deliberate curse, a condemnation of the spirit. Some researchers have suggested that the unknown man may have been the victim of an exceptional punishment. One possibility is that he was a criminal condemned not only in life, but also in death to wander eternally without rest. Others suggest a crime of state, a member of the royal family, a traitor or fallen in disgrace, executed clandestinely and stripped of the honors that his rank would have assured him. A particularly intriguing theory connects this mysterious young man to one of the most turbulent periods in Egyptian history, the reign of Ramses III. Ancient documents, such as the so-called Turin Judicial Papyrus 104, describe a palace conspiracy in which members of the court, including one of Ramses' wives, attempted to assassinate the pharaoh in order to place his son, Pentuer, on the throne. Could the unknown man be Pentuer himself? Genetic analysis carried out in the 21st century revealed that this mummy is directly related to Ramses III. Furthermore, studies on Ramses' mummy showed that he died violently with his throat cut. Everything seems to fit. The conspiracy, the relentless punishment, the ritual condemnation. Pentuer, trapped and executed, would have been deprived of a proper burial to punish him for his treason. And yet, doubts remain. The body shows signs of natural preservation without the chemical treatment typical of formal mummification. It was simply abandoned in the desert and then recovered. Or its condition is the result of a deliberate process designed to deliberately exclude it from the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, which was at the core of the Egyptian worldview. Other experts caution against hasty identification. The lack of inscriptions on his tomb, the absence of personal items, and the multiple anomalies in his funeral treatment open the door to broader interpretations. Was he a foreign prisoner? An important figure who fell from grace, whose name had to be erased from history? Or was he the victim of an even older and unknown ritual punishment? What is undeniable is the emotional force that his image awakens. Unlike other mummies who seem to have slipped peacefully into the afterlife, the unknown man seems to cry out through the millennia, reminding us that even in cultures as obsessed with death as the Egyptians, there are endings that defy all logic and explanation. Did his soul find peace, or does it remain trapped, a prisoner of a destiny that eludes us? Perhaps as archaeologists continue to decipher broken papyri and search for hidden tombs, we will one day be able to give this tormented figure a name, a history, and redemption. Until then, the silent cry of the unknown man will continue to echo in the dark corridors of eternity. From the silent funeral corridors of Egypt, where a cry seems to echo through the centuries, we now travel to the heart of medieval Europe, to an equally disturbing object, but not one of flesh and blood, but of ink and parchment. A gigantic book, as steeped in mystery as it is in legend. The Codex Gigas, also known as the Bible of today, is kept in the National Library of Stockholm. Its mere presence commands respect, measuring almost 1 meter in height, weighing over 70 kilograms, and containing more than 600 pages of parchment made, according to estimates, from the skin of some 160 animals. Upon opening its pages, one finds an extraordinary compendium. The entire Bible in Latin, medical treatises, historical texts, exorcism spells, and in the center of the manuscript, a full-page illustration of a figure with sharp claws, a serpentine tongue, and glowing eyes that seem to follow the reader. The image is not hidden, not concealed in the margins, or hidden behind cryptic symbols. It is there, in the very heart of the manuscript, imposing and impossible to ignore. Who created such a work, and why? According to a legend that has survived the centuries, the Codex Gigas was written in the monastery of Podlice in Bohemia in the 11th century. It is said that a monk condemned to be walled up alive for breaking his vows begged for mercy and promised to create a book containing all human knowledge in a single night. As the night wore on and the task proved impossible, he is said to have invoked the devil himself to seal a pact to complete the work in exchange for his soul. Thus, according to legend, he not only helped write the manuscript, but also left his portrait on its pages as an eternal mark of his intervention. Of course, historians are skeptical of this narrative. Paleographic analysis indicates that the manuscript was probably written by a single hand, but over several decades, not in a single night. The uniformity of the calligraphy, the absence of significant errors, and the impressive consistency of the work suggest that its author or authors devoted their entire lives to the creation of the Codex Gigas. However, even leaving aside the legends, many aspects remain puzzling. Why would a religious work include such an explicit image of the inimposition of honor? What deeper meaning lies behind the juxtaposition of sacred texts and magical protective formulas? Was the Codex Gigas simply an encyclopedia of medieval knowledge, or an attempt to contain both the light and darkness of human knowledge in a single object? The content of the manuscript itself reinforces this duality. On the one hand, there are biblical passages full of devotion and hope. On the other, spells to exorcise demons, lists of penances for horrendous crimes, and medical treatises that border on the esoteric. The Codex Gigas seems to embrace all facets of human existence: faith, science, superstition, fear. Another unanswered question is that of its mysterious preservation. It survived the destruction of the Pot Lake Monastery. It was moved, looted, and recovered several times, passing through the hands of emperors, imperial libraries, and war booty. Despite fires, wars, and looting, the Codex Gigas has remained almost intact through the centuries, as if an invisible force protected it from destruction. Is it simply a historical coincidence, or are we dealing with an object that, due to its symbolic nature, has been preserved by a collective instinct of fascination and fear? Even in modern times, the Codex Gigas continues to generate unease. Many visitors to the Swedish National Library claim to feel an oppressive presence when viewing it up close. Some report strange dreams after seeing it. Others simply feel unable to look away from the demonic eyes that emerge from its pages. Are we projecting our own superstitions onto an inert object? Or does the Codex Gigas, in some way we do not yet understand, continue to convey the emotional charge of its creation, its content, and its legend? We may never know if he really had a hand in its writing, But what is certain is that the Codex Gigas represents one of the most profound manifestations of human duality: the need to know, to record, to preserve, and at the same time the visceral fear of what that knowledge might reveal. A warning echo that centuries later continues to resonate on every page. From the silent libraries that house forbidden manuscripts, we now travel to the cold corridors of an old 10th century English mansion, where another mystery, woven between political intrigue and hidden passions, continues to cast its shadow over history. At the heart of this enigma is Amy Robsart, the young wife of an Elizabethan nobleman, whose death, which occurred under suspicious circumstances, never found a definitive explanation. It was September 8, 1560, at Camnor Place, a stately residence. In Oxfordshire, Amy Robsart, just 28 years old, was found dead at the foot of a steep stone staircase, her neck broken instantly. The house was practically empty that day. The servants had been sent to a nearby fair, a coincidence that aroused suspicion from the outset. At first glance, the authorities ruled it an accident. However, the circumstances were disturbing, to say the least. Amy was the wife of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, favorite of Queen Elizabeth I of England. Rumors about the closeness between Dudley and the monarch were already rife at court, and the sudden death of his wife, just as his political ambitions seemed to be reaching their zenith, caused a scandal that even the passage of centuries has failed to dispel. What really happened on that old staircase at Camnor Place? Some contemporary accounts suggested that Amy was depressed, suffering from a debilitating illness, possibly breast cancer or a bone tumor, and that she may have thrown herself down the stairs in a desperate act. Others raised the possibility of a freak accident, an accidental fall, perhaps caused by physical weakness or even by heavy clothing that made it difficult to keep her balance. However, there were also voices that pointed in a more sinister direction. The theory of murder, carefully planned to pave the way for marriage between Dudley and Elizabeth, quickly gained momentum. It was said that Dudley or his allies could have ordered Amy's death to remove the only obstacle between the ambitious nobleman and the throne of England. It was even rumored that Elizabeth herself, upon learning of the death, had deliberately distanced herself from Dudley to avoid being tainted by the scandal. Curiously, Dudley requested an official investigation into his wife's death, perhaps to clear his name. But the jury's verdict of accidental death failed to silence the suspicions, and the stigma of that tragic event followed Dudley for the rest of his life. The location of the fall also raises questions. Some reports describe the staircase as steep and dangerous, but others suggest that it was not high enough to cause the fatal fracture Amy suffered. In addition, witnesses noted that her body had additional injuries that were difficult to explain by a fall alone. Was she pushed? Was she murdered elsewhere and then placed at the foot of the stairs? Or was she really the victim of a tragic accident amplified by the veracity of court intrigues? Other more subtle interpretations suggest that Amy may have been driven to suicide, not by romantic despair, but by indirect political pressures. Isolated, ill, and aware of her role as an obstacle in a power game greater than herself, her death may have been the only way to free her husband and also free herself from her own suffering. Records from the period are incomplete, and subsequent investigation was marred by rumors, political interests, and the inevitable passage of time. No autopsy reports, detailed descriptions of the scene, or impartial testimonies have been preserved, only fragments echoing a drama whose protagonist played with forces too great to be fully controlled. Today, the name Amy Robsart remains a tragic symbol of a time when ambition and personal destiny were dangerously intertwined. Her death remains open to interpretation, like a broken mirror that reflects different truths depending on who is looking at it. Was Amy Robsart the victim of a cold and calculated conspiracy, of a fortuitous tragedy magnified by mistrust, or of a silent sadness that found its final outcome on the steps of an old staircase? Perhaps, like so many other historical mysteries, her story is destined to remain suspended between truth and legend. a lingering shadow in the corridors of English history. From the cold corridors of an English mansion laden with secrets, we now cross an ocean to the thick, lonely forests of the southern United States. There, under vast skies and on barely marked trails, another enigma lurks in the shadows of history. The death of Meriwether Lewis, the famous explorer of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The scene is the Grinders Stand-In, an isolated refuge on the Olden Shea Trail southwest of Nashville, Tennessee. It was the early morning of October 11th, 1809, when Mary Lewis, at the age of 35, was found dying in his room with gunshot wounds to his head and abdomen. Hours later, he would die far from the spotlight that had illuminated his life a few years earlier. The official version, almost immediate, was suicide. Lewis, tormented by debt, political pressure, and deep melancholy, had ended his life in a fit of despair. His emotional deterioration, documented in letters full of anguish, seemed to corroborate this. But the details of his death, as so often happens, are disturbing. According to reports, Louis received not one, but 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the head, both potentially fatal. It is common for someone attempting to take their own life to shoot themselves twice. It is plausible that after a devastating wound, he would have had the strength to shoot himself again. In addition, subsequent witnesses mentioned signs of a struggle in his room, overturned furniture, displaced objects, and an atmosphere of violence difficult to reconcile with the account of a peaceful suicide. The questions do not end there. Lewis was traveling with the intention of presenting important documents related to his tenure as governor of Upper Louisiana, documents that many believe could have exposed irregularities or powerful enemies. He may have encountered someone along the way who preferred to silence him forever. His companions, especially the innkeeper, Priscilla Grinder, offered confusing and contradictory testimony. In some versions, she claimed to have heard gunshots and moans, but did not come to help out of fear. In others, she spoke of multiple individuals present during the night. The official records, hastily drawn up, lacked a thorough investigation. Over the years, various alternative theories have gained traction. Some argue that Louis was the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Others suggest a covert execution ordered by political adversaries who saw him as a threat. Centuries later, there were even requests to exhume his remains and perform a modern autopsy that could clarify once and for all the cause of his death. But so far, all efforts have hit a wall of uncertainty. Lost documents, ambiguous testimonies, and partial official records seem to suggest that the very nature of the event resists being unraveled. Mary Lewis was not just any man. As the leader of the expedition that crossed the North American continent from east to west, his name was associated with one of the greatest achievements of the young American nation. But behind the myth of the heroic explorer was a deeply human man, vulnerable and worn down by the burdens of his time. His death was the inevitable result of a tormented mind, broken under the weight of impossible expectations. Or was it the carefully silenced final chapter in a story of ambition, rivalry, and betrayal? The place where Lewis died still stands. A simple, solitary stone monument rises in Grinders Stand, reminding visitors that the frontier was not just a physical territory to be conquered, but also an abyss of risks and mysteries. Every crackle in the forest, every whisper of the wind through the trees of Tennessee, seems to ask, even today, what really happened on that forgotten dawn. Perhaps, like many other shadows on the road of history, the truth about the death of Meriwether Lewis is destined to remain hidden in the mist of lonely roads and the echo of shots lost in the night. From the forgotten trails of the American forests, we now cross over to the open fields and rivers of the old continent, where the Roman Empire left deep traces, visible even in the stones. But among the ruins of temples, villas, and fortresses, much more puzzling objects also emerge, silent pieces whose meaning has been lost in the shadows of time. Among them are artifacts that still defy all logical explanation. Roman dodecahedrons, made of bronze or On rare occasions, stone dodecahedrons have a precise geometric shape, with 12 pentagonal faces, each pierced with a circular hole of varying size. At each vertex, small spheres adorn the joints, giving them an almost symbolic appearance, as if they were ritual objects or instruments of some forgotten science. More than 100 of these enigmatic artifacts have been found in Europe, in England, France, Germany, Belgium, and even in territories as far away as Hungary, always in ancient regions of the Roman Empire, always isolated, without instructions, without inscriptions, without context. What were they used for? Theories abound, and each one seems to raise more questions than answers. Some suggest that they were measuring instruments, perhaps used to calculate distances or military calibers. Others propose that they served as candlesticks, as some examples have traces of wax in their cavities. There are also those who interpret them as agricultural tools, instruments for measuring the ideal size of seedlings or seeds. But if that were the case, why such variability in sizes? Why the lack of standardization in a civilization as obsessed with precision as Rome was? Another school of thought suggests a ceremonial or religious function. The number 12, recurrent in ancient cosmologies, could allude to the months of the year, zodiac signs, or invisible cosmic forces. Perhaps dodecahedrons were used in prediction rituals, astrological practices, or as protective amulets. And then there are even more speculative hypotheses: optical devices for astronomical calculations, mathematical toys for the educated elite, or even artifacts linked to mystery cults whose secrets were passed down from generation to generation and which we have simply forgotten today. The most intriguing thing is that despite the numerous finds, there is not a single written reference to these objects in the vast Roman literature. No historian, poet, engineer, or chronicler mentions them, as if their existence had been part of a marginal knowledge reserved only for a few or so commonplace that it never deserved to be recorded. Archaeologists have found dodecahedrons in a wide variety of contexts, buried in fields near military fortresses, in ancient rural settlements, and sometimes even inside tombs. But none of these discoveries has provided a definitive answer. In 2021, experiments conducted by modern enthusiasts suggested that dodecahedrons may have been used to knit woolen gloves, using the openings to define the size of the fingers. A practical possibility, yes, but one that still leaves questions about the elaborate ornamentation and geographical distribution of the finds. Would the Romans really have designed such a complex and mathematically precise object for such a mundane function? Others point out that knowledge in ancient times was not always compartmentalized as it is today. An object could be practical, ritual, and symbolic all at once. The dodecahedron itself could have served as a tool, a talisman, and a visual representation of cosmic principles. Thus, on each edge, in each carefully carved perforation, the dodecahedrons seem to whisper the complexity of a world where science and magic, geometry and mysticism were not opposing concepts, but threads interwoven in the fabric of everyday life. What secrets do these small bronze polyhedrons still hold? They represent lost knowledge, a function that would be trivial today but was then considered sacred. Or are they simply silent witnesses to a Rome that was more diverse, more mysterious, and less understood than we tend to imagine? Perhaps in some forgotten corner of an ancient library, a text still awaits that will explain their true purpose. Or perhaps, like so many other relics of the past, the dodecahedrons are destined to remain eternal symbols of what history has decided to keep secret. From the small bronze artifacts that still defy Roman logic, we now turn our gaze to gigantic structures drawn in the vast solitude of the deserts. These shapes are barely visible from the ground, but their enigmatic magnitude is revealed only when viewed from the air. We now delve into the mystery of the desert kites, stretching across thousands of kilometers in the Middle East and Central Asia, from Syria and Jordan to Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan. Desert kites are long, narrow stone constructions that form patterns of converging lines ending in enclosed enclosures. Seen from above, they resemble huge kites or arrows pointing toward an invisible target. These structures, some of them more than 5,000 years old, have been detected in surprising numbers. More than 6,000 kites have been documented in different regions, scattered across arid lands, forgotten plateaus, and remote hillsides. But their exact purpose remains a mystery. The most widely accepted hypothesis suggests that deserts were mass hunting traps. Wild animals, such as gazelles, onagers, and antelopes, will be herded through long stone corridors into enclosures where they would be captured or killed. It was a collective strategy designed not for a lone hunter, but for entire communities capable of providing themselves with food in large quantities. This explanation fits with the skeletal remains found in some enclosures, but it also raises disturbing questions. What kind of social organization and ecological knowledge were needed to design, build, and use such structures? And why, after so much effort, were their walls abandoned to the wear and tear of the centuries? Some researchers propose that the cates mark a crucial moment in human evolution, the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to more complex forms of social life, anticipating the domestication of animals and the emergence of agriculture. However, other more speculative theories have emerged. Some archaeologists have suggested that the deserts may have had ritual functions in addition to practical ones. Perhaps hunting was not just an act of survival, but a sacred event, a collective ceremony that reinforced social bonds and the spiritual order of the communities. Others, observing the precision of some designs, have proposed alternative uses, such as astronomical alignments, signaling systems between villages, or even defensive structures. These are hypotheses still without conclusive evidence, but they show how little we still understand about these ancient civilizations. Another layer of mystery is added by recent discoveries in places such as Saudi Arabia, where new forms of quites have been found to be more complex and sophisticated than previously believed. Some include inner circles, raised platforms, or network connections, suggesting that the purposes of these structures may have evolved over time or be much more diverse than our modern logic can comprehend. And the same question always remains: why were they forgotten? The arrival of new forms of hunting, climate change, the depletion of animal populations. Each factor may have contributed to the gradual abandonment of the kites. But in their silence, in their stubborn permanence under the relentless sun, they seem to whisper stories of a humanity that knew how to shape the landscape itself in order to survive, and that then let their works fade away under the weight of wind and time. Today, flying over the vast plains of the deserts appear like ancient scars, marks of an era before written memory, shapes that only make sense from above, as if they had been designed for eyes capable of flying. Was it pure intuition, or did they have an understanding of space and nature that we have underestimated? Perhaps among the precisely arranged stones, secrets about early human ingenuity still lie dormant. Secrets about how forgotten peoples read the landscape, negotiated their subsistence, and perhaps celebrated the very mystery of life and death in the vast deserts of the ancient world. From the vast deserts marked by ancient hunting lines, we now descend into the depths of an equally enigmatic place. Saqqara, the sacred necropolis of ancient Egypt. There, beneath layers of sand and centuries of oblivion, lies a structure that is as baffling for its scale as for its precision. The Saqqara Serapeum and its gigantic granite sarcophagi. Access to the Serapeum leads through long tunnels carved into the rock, dimly lit, where the atmosphere becomes dense, charged with a solemnity that can almost be felt. Along these passages, one after another, huge dark granite boxes are lined up, some of them weighing up to 80 tons. The sarcophagi are so massive, their surfaces so polished, and their angles so perfectly defined that their mere existence raises questions that are difficult to answer. Who carved these monuments? How were they transported, moved, and placed with such precision at a time when the tools available were supposedly simple copper chisels and rudimentary levers? The traditional explanation holds that these gigantic sarcophagi served to house the sacred remains of the Apis bulls, animals revered as incarnations of the deity Pda. The cult of Apis was one of the most important in Egyptian religion, and ensuring eternal rest for these animals would have been considered an act of utmost devotion. Some sarcophagi do indeed contain inscriptions dating from the New Kingdom around 1400 BC and refer to these sacred rituals. But this is where the inconsistencies begin to appear. Many of the sarcophagi in the Serapeum have no inscriptions. They are completely smooth, as if they predate the customary use of hieroglyphics, or as if their original purpose had been different. Hieroglyphics, or as if their original purpose had been something else entirely. Furthermore, the effort required to build and locate these structures far exceeds what would be necessary to simply house animal remains, however sacred they may have been. Why would such a huge amount of resources be invested in the construction of sarcophagi so disproportionately large for bulls? The nature of the material used adds another layer of mystery. Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones known in ancient times, was transported more than 800 kilometers away. The perfection of the finishes, the polishing of the interior surfaces, so precise that a sheet of paper can barely pass through, suggests techniques that would still be enormously complex today without modern tools. Are we underestimating the technical knowledge of the ancient Egyptians? Or is it possible that these sarcophagi are remnants of an even older technology, predating even the classical dynasties, inherited by later generations who perhaps no longer fully understood their purpose? Alternative theories have flourished in the absence of certainties. Some researchers have suggested that the sarcophagi may have had different functions. They could have been resonance chambers for acoustic rituals, containers for sacred objects that are still unknown, or even symbolic devices designed to encapsulate some kind of spiritual power. Others go further and suggest that the sarcophagi could be connected to forgotten technological traditions, knowledge about vibration, energy, or even the lost knowledge of an earlier civilization that flourished long before we conventionally accept. And yet, despite all the hypotheses, the Serapeum remains unperturbed, a place that does not easily reveal its secrets. It holds in its darkness not only the remains of sacred bulls, but also the traces of an architectural ambition that still defies our understanding. As you walk among the granite giants, it is difficult not to feel a kind of small reverence and awareness that what we see is only the surface of a much deeper story. Each sarcophagus, each silent wall, seems to whisper questions we do not yet know how to ask. Were these colossal boxes simple animal tombs, or ritual portals to dimensions we can only guess at? Do they symbolize concepts lost to us with the passing of entire civilizations? Or are they simply the purest expression of the human desire to transcend death and embrace the eternal? Perhaps like so many other wonders of the ancient world, the giants of the Serapeum will continue to wait in the shadows of Saqqara for us to find the keys to truly understand them. From the stone corridors of Saqqara, where gigantic sarcophagi lie in the shadows, we now head to another region of Egypt, equally silent, equally full of enigmas. A place where the desert, seemingly motionless and barren, holds a secret even older than the pyramids, the Valley of the Whales. Located in the heart of the western desert in the Guadalquivir region, this sun-scorched landscape appears at first glance to be an endless sea of sand, but beneath its golden dunes emerge creatures that should not be there. Magnificently preserved whale skeletons are scattered across a landscape that was once an ocean. The fossils of Wadi Alitan date back some 40 million years, to a time when what is now an arid desert was a tropical sea teeming with life. Here, in an extraordinary twist of evolution, we find early whale species such as Basilosaurus and Dorodon with vestigial hind legs, crucial evidence of their transition from land to sea. At first glance, it might seem like a story perfectly explained by science, a marine ecosystem that after millions of years of geological changes was trapped and fossilized in the sand. And yet, the Valley of the Whales raises deeper questions that are more difficult to silence. Why are these remains so exceptionally well preserved in such a concentrated area? What exact forces led not only to their death, but also to their almost intact preservation in an environment that for millennia should have eroded them and made them disappear? Some researchers point to the hypothesis of a mass death caused by abrupt climate change or tectonic movements. Others propose that the carcasses were trapped in ancient shallow lagoons, protected from scavengers and deterioration by rapidly accumulating sediments. However, the arrangement of some skeletons and their anomalous abundance in certain areas of the valley have also fueled less conventional interpretations. There may have been a catastrophic event that caused the simultaneous death of multiple individuals, such as a sudden environmental fluctuation, water poisoning, or phenomena that are still unknown. The fossils of Wadi al-Tan also hold anatomical mysteries. Some whales have peculiar adaptations, such as vestigial appendages or structures that are not fully understood. These are evolutionary traces that suggest alternative paths in the development of marine life. Paths that did not become established, but which existed for a brief moment in the history of the Earth. In 2005, UNESCO declared Wadi al-Tan a World Heritage Site, not only for its extraordinary beauty, but also for its incomparable scientific value. And yet, even from a scientific perspective, the valley retains an aura of mystery that is almost sacred. Walking among the sun-bleached skeletons today is like walking through a cosmic cemetery. Bones that once supported giants that plowed forgotten seas now lie exposed to the wind, as if the earth itself wanted to remember a chapter from its deepest memory. Can we really comprehend the scope of the transformations that gave rise to this marine cemetery in the middle of the desert? Or are we like the ancient observers, fascinated by phenomena whose true magnitude we can only guess? Perhaps the Valley of the Whales is not only a fossilized testimony to the past, but also a mirror that invites us to reflect on the fragility of worlds. Worlds that appear eternal can disappear, change shape, and be buried under the sand of oblivion. The wind continues to blow in Wadi al-Tan. The dunes shift slowly, hiding and revealing remains at their whim. And meanwhile, the ancient whales, trapped between eras, continue to ask us, silently, to what extent do we really understand the forces that have shaped our world? From the banks of Mesopotamia, where small artifacts seem to hide glimpses of lost knowledge, we now turn to the arid and silent landscapes of western China at the foot of Mount Yungang. There, in an inhospitable land of salt flats and wind-eroded rock formations, another mystery awaits that defies simple explanations: the bygone pipes. The setting is breathtaking. The mountain, conical in shape and isolated, stands alone on a vast expanse of white desert. Inside and around the nearby Tosan Lake, strange tubular structures emerge from the rocks, conglomerates of metal tubes, some up to 40 centimeters in diameter, deeply embedded in the mountain and the dry lake bed. The first reports of this discovery caught the public's attention in 2002, when a group of Chinese explorers documented the formations and reported their astonishing organization. Not only did the pipes appear to follow systematic patterns, but in some cases they penetrated solid rock, as if they had been deliberately installed, connecting the interior of the mountain with the surrounding surface. Initial analyses of some samples from the bygone pipes revealed an unusual composition, mainly iron oxides, but also traces of silicon and calcium, elements that under certain conditions could suggest an age of tens of thousands of years. Even more intriguing was the presence of organic components inside them, suggesting that some form of life, perhaps specialized bacteria, may have interacted with the material. Conventional interpretations suggest that the pipes could be the result of a natural process known as ferruginous concretion, where iron-rich minerals seep through cracks and form structures that, when viewed in cross-section, mimic artificial tubes. Can nature create such organized patterns so aligned, so precisely embedded in a mountain? Here the mystery deepens. Some researchers have put forward more daring theories. What if the bygone pipes were remnants of a lost civilization whose technical knowledge has been completely erased by time, or perhaps they are the remains of some unknown experiment, an infrastructure built for purposes we cannot imagine today? And there is no shortage of those captivated by the strangeness of the discovery, and the remote location of Mount Bygone have suggested even more radical explanations, that the structures could be evidence of non-human activity, remnants of ancient contacts between our civilization and visitors from other worlds. This echoes broader theories about ancient astronauts, always controversial, but which find in these findings anomalies that are difficult to ignore. Faced with these speculations, orthodox science remains cautious. Subsequent studies support the hypothesis of natural formations, although they admit that the specific conditions under which they would have formed are not fully understood. The lack of exhaustive research, due in part to the remote location and logistical limitations, has left many questions unanswered. And so Mount Bygone remains a semi-forgotten enigma, visited sporadically by curious individuals and independent explorers, but still awaiting a systematic expedition that may reveal or perhaps further complicate its true secret. In the meantime, the pipes remain there, emerging from the bare rock, weathering the elements as silent witnesses to a natural process, or not, that we have not yet fully understood. What are the bygone pipes really? An unexplained geological wonder? An echo of a lost civilization? Or a reminder that even in this seemingly mapped and understood world, there are still areas of shadow? Perhaps beneath the arid surface of Mount Bygone lies not only an explanation, but also a deeper lesson, that the limits of our knowledge are more fragile than we tend to admit, and that sometimes the oldest stones still hold secrets that history has failed to silence. From the rocky deserts of China, where inexplicable formations emerge, to the frozen confines of northern Canada, a vast and silent landscape where snow covers the earth like a shroud and the wind seems to whisper ancient forgotten stories. Here, in the solitude of the Nunavut territory, lies one of the most disturbing stories of the 20th century, the disappearance of the village of Anjikuni. Lake Anjikuni, surrounded by blackened fir forests and vast expanses of tundra, was home to a small Inuit community, an isolated place, inaccessible for much of the year, where the inhabitants lived in close harmony with the land and the seasons. The story of its disappearance, as reported in November 1930, began when a fur trapper named Joe Label arrived at the village in search of shelter. What he found left him stunned. The village that should have been bustling with activity, singing, campfires, and children's voices was completely empty. The huts and skin tents were still standing. Inside, the everyday items remained untouched. Clothes, food, hunting weapons. According to some accounts, even pots hung over fires that were still burning. It was as if the inhabitants had left the place in an instant, without warning, leaving behind everything they owned. Alerted by the BL, Canadian authorities sent a mounted patrol of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to investigate. What they found in Anjikuni only added to the confusion. There were no signs of a struggle or traces of a hasty retreat. The graves in the small local cemetery were open and empty. The bodies had been removed in an inexplicable manner. The village's sled dogs, essential for survival in that environment, were found dead from starvation, tied up and abandoned. What could have happened? Theories quickly emerged, although none could fully explain the phenomenon. Some pointed to the possibility of a sudden migration, motivated by an invisible threat, an outbreak of disease, extreme climate change, or a spiritual command received in collective dreams. Others, seeking a more tangible explanation, spoke of attacks by other indigenous groups or hostile bands of hunters, although the lack of signs of violence made this hypothesis difficult to sustain. And as with so many other mysteries of collective disappearances, more extraordinary interpretations soon emerged. Some local accounts spoke of unusual lights seen in the sky on the nights before the disappearance. Witnesses spoke of pulsating glows, of bright objects suspended in the winter atmosphere. Could the village of Anjikuni have been the victim of some unknown aerial phenomenon, natural or otherwise? Or are these fragmented memories simply attempts to explain the inexplicable in an environment that is already hostile and steeped in ancient superstitions? Over the decades, some researchers have questioned the veracity of the original account. They suggest that the story may have been exaggerated or even invented by journalists eager to feed the hunger for exotic mysteries that dominated the media at the time. However, others argue that beyond possible distortions, there were real disappearances of small Inuit communities, caused by extreme environmental factors or by displacement induced by contact with Western explorers and traders. And yet the mystery remains. Why? If it was a simple migration or abandonment, no clear traces of the displacement were found. Why did they leave behind all their belongings, their weapons, their food, their funeral rituals? And what is the significance of the deliberate exhumation of the dead? A deeply anomalous act, even within traditional Inuit beliefs. Today, Lake Anjikuni remains covered in ice for most of the year, surrounded by lonely forests where few venture. The wind that sweeps the snow across the plains seems to carry with it echoes of muffled laughter, forgotten songs, stories that refuse to be told. Was the disappearance of Anchikin a tragic accident, a desperate migration, or something else? Perhaps in the frozen reaches of the world, where the line between reality and myth becomes blurred, some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved forever, defying our need to explain everything. From the frozen solitudes of the north, where an entire village seemed to vanish without a trace, we now travel to a completely different landscape, the humid and vibrant jungles of southern Costa Rica. There, hidden among the foliage and scattered across plantations and rivers, lie some of the most enigmatic structures on the American continent. The giant stone spheres of Costa Rica. At first glance, their simplicity is disconcerting. They're almost perfect spheres, some just a few centimeters in diameter, others more than 2 m and weighing several tons. Carved with astonishing precision, these spheres of granite, gabbro, and other hard rocks rest silently on the tropical ground, like forgotten remnants of a time and purpose we no longer understand. Most were discovered in the 1930s when banana companies, expanding their plantations in the Dequis Delta, began to stumble upon them under layers of earth and vegetation. Some appeared alone, others grouped in geometric formations, triangles, straight lines, perfectly aligned pairs, but all of them raised the same question. Who made them? How and why? Initial studies pointed to the pre-Columbian culture known as the Kiss people, who inhabited the region between 700 AD and 150 AD. However, there are no written documents or surviving oral traditions that explain the method of construction or the purpose of the spheres. The Diki people left no records that allow us to understand the meaning of these silent structures. Was the creation of the spheres a ceremonial act, a way of marking sacred territories? Or did they respond to a more astronomical logic aligned with constellations, solstices, or celestial navigation routes? The perfection of their form raises equally disturbing technical questions. The tools available to the ancient inhabitants of the region were stone and wood. Iron and other hard metals did not exist in Mesoamerica at that time. How did they manage to carve such perfect spheres from such resistant materials and with such a degree of symmetry? Some theories suggest that the spheres were worked over many years through controlled heating and cooling of the rock, or through systematic polishing with sand and water. Others imagine more lost techniques. Knowledge passed down through generations, refined to levels of mastery that we are unable to easily replicate today. As with other great archaeological mysteries, more speculative interpretations have also emerged. Some alternative researchers have suggested that the spheres could represent models of celestial bodies, three-dimensional maps of the sky, or even traces of advanced knowledge inherited from older civilizations whose traces have disappeared. There is also no shortage of local legends attributing their origin to supernatural forces. Indigenous peoples' stories spoke of magical powers capable of moving the stones, or of ancient gods who left these spheres as signs for humans. Throughout the 20th century, many spheres were moved from their original locations. They were moved to gardens, squares, and museums, thus losing the critical information that their original arrangement might have provided. This archaeological uprooting has made reconstructing their true meaning even more difficult, leaving the field open to speculation and wonder. Today, some of the spheres remain in their original locations, protected as part of UNESCO's World Heritage, but their silence remains the same. What motivated a civilization to devote so much time, effort, and skill to creating such pure forms? What message, if any, did they intend to leave carved in the eternity of stone? Was an offering a symbol of power, a representation of the cosmos, or something we have not yet been able to imagine? The Diki spheres lie beneath the tropical rain, beneath the scorching sun, beneath the gaze of those who, generation after generation, contemplate them without fully understanding them. Like silent guardians of a lost time, they invite us to wonder whether, among the weeds and stone, there still lies hidden an essential part of human history that we are on the verge of forgetting. From the rainforests of Costa Rica, where perfect stone spheres defy the passage of time, we now travel to the arid lands of South Africa, where an even deeper mystery lies hidden in the bowels of the earth. There, in the mines near the town of Klerksdorp, objects were discovered that are as puzzling for their shape as for their age. The enigmatic Klerksdorp spheres are small and unassuming in appearance. Most are no more than 5 centimeters in diameter. Some are perfectly spherical, while others are slightly flattened, as if they had been intentionally molded. The material varies. Hematite, goethite, pyrite, minerals formed under extreme geological conditions. But what really catches the eye are their surface features, parallel bands engraved with disconcerting precision, lines that seem to surround them around their equator. The discovery of these spheres extracted from geological formations, known as the otostal outcrops, poses a fascinating dilemma. The rocks in which they were found are estimated to be around 3 billion years old, long before any complex life existed on Earth, and certainly long before humanity emerged. How is it possible that objects that appear to be manufactured appear in such ancient strata? They could be the work of nature, or we could be looking at traces of knowledge or activity that defies everything we think we know about our planet's past. The conventional explanation offered by geologists is that the spheres are the result of natural processes, with corrections formed by the accumulation of minerals around a core over millions of years under specific pressure and temperature conditions. The bands, according to this theory, would simply be lines of mineral deposition along the growth of the concretions. And yet, the Klerksdorp spheres do not easily fit into ordinary patterns. Some specimens show levels of symmetry that seem too precise to be the result of chance. In addition, certain unofficial reports mention that some of the spheres are so perfectly balanced that they border on modern mechanical precision standards. These details, although debated and often dismissed by orthodox science, have given rise to more speculative theories. Some propose that the spheres could be artifacts created by unknown civilizations, even predating the emergence of humans as we understand them today. Others suggest even more exotic origins, extraterrestrial technologies, or remnants of worlds that existed before our recorded history. Of course, such theories conflict directly with current geological knowledge. There is no accepted evidence of advanced civilizations on Earth 3 billion years ago. Nevertheless, the mere existence of the spheres and the lack of a completely satisfactory explanation for their perfection fuel the fascination. Part of the confusion also stems from the lack of exhaustive and systematic research. Many of the specimens were found by miners, informally cataloged, or sold as curiosities. The absence of a clear archaeological context, coupled with the fragmentary nature of the analyses carried out, has left the field open to both scientific caution and imaginative speculation. Today, some of the Klerksdorp spheres are on display in local museums, while others remain in private collections, far from public scrutiny. They are objects, small, modest in appearance, but whose existence raises questions of enormous magnitude. Are they really mere geological curiosities, examples of nature's infinite capacity to create forms that appear artificial? Or are they, as some suggest, vestiges of a past that challenges our timelines, our certainties, and our accepted histories? Perhaps the Klerksdorp spheres are simply reminders of how limited our knowledge of the Earth's deep processes is. Or perhaps, in their perfect silence, they're trying to tell us something we are not yet ready to understand. There, beneath layers of ancient stone, time has preserved these little gems for unimaginable eons. And as we continue to wonder about their origin, the spheres remain impassive, discreetly challenging the limits of our imagination. From the depths of the South African earth, where small spheres challenge our understanding of antiquity, we now travel to the tranquil fields of France, where another equally puzzling enigma remains buried in memory and controversy. We move to the small village of Glossel, where artifacts emerge from the disturbed earth of a discrete hill, challenging traditional archaeology. The enigmatic tablets of Glol. It was 1924 when a young farmer, Emile Freyden, and his grandfather, while working on a piece of land known as Champdamog, the Field of the Dead, stumbled upon stones that appeared to be carefully arranged. Digging with trembling hands, they discovered a series of strange objects: clay tablets, carved bones, tools, ceramics, and, above all, inscriptions in an unknown writing system. The glossal tablets did not seem to fit into any known framework. Its alphabet, consisting of geometric characters and straight lines, some resembling Phoenician symbols, others runes, baffled experts. It was a primitive language, a rudimentary attempt at codification, or something else entirely. Soon, archaeologists, linguists, and anthropologists flocked to Glossal, torn between fascination and skepticism. Some claimed that the pieces dated back to prehistoric times, potentially predating the classical civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Others immediately accused fraud, a fabrication too perfect to be true, born of ambition or ignorance. Initial examinations did not help to clarify the situation. Radiocarbon dating did not yet exist, and authentication methods were rudimentary. The disputes became personal. Emile Freyden was accused of forgery, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. After years of litigation, the courts exonerated him, yet the shadow of doubt never completely left the case. The central problem remains unresolved. What exactly are the Glel tablets? Some researchers argue that they are relics of a proto-historic European people, perhaps from a civilization contemporary with or predating the Celtic cultures. Others suggest that they could be the remains of an isolated community that independently developed a now-forgotten writing system. The similarities of some symbols to Phoenician, Iberian, or Etruscan inscriptions fuel the hypothesis of trans-Mediterranean contacts in prehistory, cultural routes that, if they existed, would profoundly transform our view of ancient migrations. But skeptics insist. Stylistic inconsistencies, the mixture of styles and techniques and inscriptions that seem clumsy compared to other ancient alphabets, all point, according to them, to a modern creation, an unintentional or deliberate forgery. Throughout the 20th century, new dating techniques, such as thermoluminescence, have suggested that at least some of the glossal pieces could be of considerable real age, several thousand years old. However, even these results have been the subject of debate, questioned in their methodology and interpretation. And so glossal remains in an archaeological limbo. Too intriguing to be dismissed, too tainted by controversy to be accepted without reservation. The small museum in Glossal, founded by the Freyden family, still preserves hundreds of pieces, tablets, idols, bone tools, pottery fragments. Each object seems to carry with it not only its own material weight, but also the intangible weight of an untold story. A story perhaps lost among generations who left no other trace than these signs in clay. What is hidden behind the glossal tablets? An authentic echo of a forgotten civilization, a naive effort to recreate a mythical past, or perhaps a warning about the fragile boundary between science and the desire to find wonders in the peaceful fields of Allier, where the avens sway in the wind and time seems to pass at a different pace. The mystery remains intact. Beneath the earth, other fragments of a language, of knowledge, or of a lost dream may still lie dormant. And, meanwhile, the tablets remain there, silent, questioning us. What is real, and what part of the past do we still dare to discover? From the peaceful French countryside, where ancient signs on clay raise more questions than answers, we now move to a much more arid and legendary landscape, the caves of Qumran, on the desolate shores of the Dead Sea. There, hidden among dusty caves and fragments of forgotten history, a unique object was found, unlike any other ancient manuscript. Known to man, the enigmatic copper scroll. At first glance, the copper scroll does not look like any ordinary manuscript. It is not made of parchment or papyrus, like the other Dead Sea manuscripts, but of rusted metal, a thin sheet of hammered copper that had been carefully rolled up on itself. It was so fragile after centuries of corrosion that when researchers attempted to unfold it in 1955, they were forced to cut it into strips in order to read its contents. What they discovered was even more puzzling. Unlike the religious and philosophical texts that make up the bulk of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Copper Scroll does not speak of spirituality or divine laws. Instead, it is an inventory, a precise, detailed list of more than 60 places where huge quantities of treasures, gold and silver ingots, precious vessels, and incalculable riches were supposedly hidden, deliberately concealed in caves, cisterns, ruins, and fields. But the story is not that simple. The places mentioned in the text are described ambiguously in the third cave on the left, past the tomb of so-and-so, under the staircase of Sister Number 4. There are no clear coordinates, and many of the landmarks mentioned have disappeared or been transformed over the centuries. Was the Copper Scroll a genuine treasure map, a ceremonial document, or a chronicle of wealth destined to remain hidden forever? Some experts believe that the treasure could have belonged to the Second Temple of Jerusalem, looted and hidden before the destruction of the city by the Romans in 70 AD. Others suggest that it was secret property belonging to a dissident sect, such as the Essenes, who were responsible for other manuscripts found in Qumran. However, despite intensive searches, none of the treasures mentioned in the Copper Scroll have ever been found. Legal and illegal excavations have riddled the region in search of these mythical hiding places. But what remains is the silence of the earth, as if the treasures, if they ever existed, had already been recovered, destroyed, or were simply an encrypted symbol, a metaphor that was never meant to be interpreted literally. And yet, the mystery persists. Why use copper to inscribe such an unusual text? Who were the authors of this secret list? And what deeper meaning could there be in hiding such vast riches, not only physically, but also behind a veil of ambiguity and encryption? The material of the scroll itself suggests that its contents were considered extremely important. Copper was a valuable resource. Engraving a message on it implied a conscious effort to preserve it for posterity. It was not a passing piece of writing, but a testament to something that was meant to survive time, war, and oblivion. Some contemporary researchers wonder if the real treasure was not simply material. Perhaps the Copper Scroll encodes spiritual knowledge, a hidden legacy intended only for those capable of deciphering its codes. Others wonder if we are looking at history backwards. Perhaps rather than indicating the location of a physical treasure, the scroll is a testimony to a loss, a memory of riches that had already been plundered, a desperate act of remembrance in the face of imminent cultural annihilation. Today, the copper scroll is carefully preserved in the museum in Jordan, cut into metal plates that allow study its inscriptions, although the enigma remains intact. It is a voice from the past that tells us of secrets, impossible journeys, and invisible maps. As the desert winds continue to sweep through the caves of Qumran, as the Dead Sea slowly recedes, devouring the land that once protected so many mysteries, the copper scroll continues to ask us in its rusty whisper, is there still something buried beneath the hot stones of history waiting to be found? From the dusty caves of Qumran, where an ancient copper scroll promises forgotten treasures, we now cross to another remote corner of the world. In the heart of Brazil, near the banks of the Inga River, a solitary stone awaits us, silent and laden with enigmas, the enigmatic Inga stone. There, under the scorching sun of Paraíba, lies a vast rocky bed of quartzite covered with inscriptions that at first glance appear to be the spontaneous work of nature. But a closer look reveals something else. Hundreds of precisely carved symbols, straight lines, spirals, geometric figures, stylized animals, and strokes that, according to some, resemble ancient forms of writing. The Inga stone is not just a decorated panel. Its surface area of more than 250 square meters seems to have been systematically used as a stone canvas. Some inscriptions are several meters long, as if they were designed to be seen or read from a distance, or perhaps to be understood by observers who no longer exist. Who created these engravings? For what purpose? And what message, if any, did they try to preserve in the hardness of the stone? Traditional archaeology offers moderate explanations. The engravings are believed to have been made by pre-Columbian indigenous peoples, possibly around 6,000 years ago. For these groups, rock art would have had spiritual or ritual significance, a form of symbolic communication with the spirit world or a record of important events in their worldview. However, many details of the site defy such a simple interpretation. Some figures appear to represent recognizable constellations, such as Orion and the Pleiades, suggesting sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Other symbols resemble ancient scripts from the Mediterranean and the Near East, such as Phoenician or Proto-Scythian. It is possible that in ancient times, civilizations separated by oceans had contact with each other, or we were projecting modern patterns onto symbols that had completely different meanings. In their original context, the mystery deepens with the geometric patterns and shapes that resemble mathematical or astronomical diagrams. Some independent researchers have suggested that the Inga stone could have been a celestial observatory, a kind of stone calendar that marks solstices, equinoxes, and cycles of celestial bodies. However, these hypotheses, as attractive as they are, have not been scientifically confirmed. The lack of written documentation or oral tradition explaining the engravings leaves the field open to speculation. Others have gone even further, postulating that the Inga stone could be evidence of lost civilizations, such as the mythical Atlantis, or even of visitors from other worlds who left encrypted messages here on the edge of the jungle for future generations. More cautious scientists insist on the importance of seeking explanations within the local indigenous context. And yet, the size, precision, and distribution of the inscriptions keep the wonder alive. Why would a prehistoric people invest so much effort in carving lasting symbols on a remote stone? What significance did this place have for them? Was it a sanctuary, an archive of knowledge, a portal to the sacred? Natural deterioration and erosion have begun to erase some of the carvings. Rain, wind, and the passage of time act as silent forces, slowly blurring the messages on the stone. And with each line that fades, a piece of history that we may never decipher also fades away. Today, the Inga stone remains there, standing under the open sky, while the modern world passes by without deciphering its stone language. It is a silent testament to a past that is slipping away, to forgotten knowledge and cultures that left their mark in the only way they knew would last, engraving it in the very rock of the earth. Perhaps as long as we continue to look at the stone with modern eyes, searching for words where There were symbols of another logic. The true message will remain beyond our reach. Perhaps in its eternal silence, the Inga stone reminds us that there are secrets that belong not only to the past, but also to the very mystery of being human. From the jungles of Brazil, where ancient inscriptions resist time on living rock, we now sail toward the world of ancient maps, unknown seas, and invisible horizons. On this journey, one object emerges as a beacon of mystery in the history of cartography, the enigmatic map of Pir Reis. Today, this fragment of parchment is preserved in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. At first glance, it looks like just another map from the age of great discoveries. However, a closer look at its details reveals that we are dealing with something deeply disconcerting. The map, drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman Admiral Pir Reis, depicts the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and even more. Intriguingly, an extension to the south that has been interpreted as a representation of Antarctica centuries before the continent was officially discovered. Is it possible that ancient cartographers had knowledge of lands hidden beneath the ice? How could Pir Reis have mapped with such precision coastlines and geographical details that were barely known to Europeans at the time? According to Pir Reis's own notes, his map was not an original creation, but a compilation. Based on around 20 different sources, including maps from the time of Alexander the Great, medieval portolanos, and nautical charts brought back by Christopher Columbus. Far from clarifying the mystery, this statement only deepens it. What ancient maps existed that could contain such accurate information? What perhaps forgotten civilizations possessed geographical knowledge that in theory should not have been possible? Some conventional scholars argue that the similarities between the southern tip of the map and Antarctica are the result of modern interpretation, and that Pir Reis was simply trying to represent the southern extension of South America at a time when the continent's boundaries were not yet clearly defined. However, other researchers have pointed out details that are difficult to explain. The seemingly accurate representation of inland mountain ranges, ice-free coastlines, and proportions that in some cases surprisingly match modern images of the Antarctic continent without its current ice cover. These observations have given rise to bolder theories. The possibility that much older maps existed at a time when Antarctica was still partially free of glaciers tens of thousands of years ago, in eras that traditional science attributes exclusively to hunter-gatherer cultures. Could there have been a civilization prior to those we know capable of exploring and mapping the world with a level of precision that we have only recently rediscovered? Pir Reis' map also raises other more subtle questions. What happened to the original sources on which it was based? How were these primordial maps lost or hidden? And why does human knowledge seem to advance in waves, reaching surprising heights only to fall into oblivion? Beyond its geographical representations, the map itself is a work of art, decorated with explanatory notes, images of marine animals, and ships sailing dangerous seas. It reflects not only technical knowledge, but also a worldview in which the known and the unknown are intertwined, where exploration was an act of both discovery and reverence for the mysteries of the world. Pir Reis' map is not a definitive map. It is an incomplete fragment, full of gaps and obvious errors. But it is precisely in these imperfections that its mystery becomes even more human, a reminder of the eternal tension between what we know and what we can barely glimpse. Today, as we gaze at the faded parchment in the silent display cases of Istanbul, it is impossible not to feel the same fascination that Pir Reis must have experienced when he pieced together the scattered fragments of an almost forgotten knowledge. A knowledge that perhaps still lies hidden in lost maps, in buried manuscripts, in traditions that time has eroded but not entirely extinguished. Was Pir Reis' map simply an incomplete echo of the explorers of his time, or a fleeting window into a deeper, more complex, and more enigmatic past than we imagine? Perhaps, like all the great questions surrounding the ancient mysteries of humanity, its true answer remains today traced in invisible lines on the unfinished map of our history. From the oceans depicted on ancient maps, where unknown borders seem to border on the mythical, we now descend to the ancient sands of Mesopotamia. There, at a small archaeological site called Alubaid, objects were discovered which, despite their modest size, continue to baffle historians and archaeologists alike. The mysterious figures of the lizard men of Alubaid. The site dated between 5000 and 4000 BC. It belonged to the Ubaid culture, considered one of the precursor civilizations of its time. Amidst fragments of pottery, stone tools, and remains of ancient villages, a series of clay figures appeared that defied all logic. They are small sculptures no more than 20 centimeters tall, representing humanoid beings with reptilian features, elongated heads, almond-shaped eyes, pointed faces, and, in some cases, scaly textures on the surface. Some figures seem to show gestures of authority, others scenes from everyday life. Mothers breastfeeding their young, individuals carrying vessels or performing acts of apparent ritual importance. The most disconcerting thing is not only their appearance, but the naturalness with which these beings are represented. They do not appear as monsters or frightening figures, but as an integral part of the world depicted, as if their existence had been accepted and normalized by the culture that created them. What do these figures really represent? Are they merely artistic stylizations, or are they the memory of something much stranger? Orthodox archaeology tends to interpret the Aluadid figures as symbolic or religious representations. Perhaps they embodied fertility deities, nature spirits, or primordial forces related to water and crops, vital to a civilization that flourished on the margins of the Fertile Crescent. However, other researchers, fascinated by the strangeness of their forms, have proposed more speculative theories. Some suggest that the figures could be reminiscent of myths about reptilian creatures present in the traditions of various ancient cultures. Others, more daring, venture to suggest the possibility of lost knowledge, of a connection with non-human beings interpreted through the limited prism of a primitive worldview. It could be that the ancient inhabitants of Aluid were trying to represent something they had seen or believed they had seen in the distant past, or we are simply faced with a symbolic expression of concepts that are impossible for us to decipher today. It is important to remember that in many ancient cultures, hybrid or metamorphic animal figures were not interpreted as literal beings, but as symbols of spiritual qualities or natural archetypes. The reptile in particular carried profound meanings: renewal, fertility, connection with underground forces. Was the lizard man of Alubaid a visual metaphor, an expression of reverence for the cycles of life and death, for the water that sustained an inhospitable land? Or perhaps these sculptures are traces of a more arcane knowledge, of lost legends that have been diluted over time in the sands of Mesopotamia. The archaeological context raises further questions. The figures were not found in majestic temples or royal tombs, but in ordinary settlements among the everyday remains of a humble life. They were not hidden treasures, but everyday objects used and probably revered by entire communities. Today, the lizard men figures are displayed in museums, protected behind glass cases. Small, fragile, silent, they seem to observe us with their eternal oblique gaze, as if they were guarding a secret that can only be intuited, never fully understood. What prompted a nascent civilization more than 6,000 years ago to represent reptilian-looking beings in such detail, with such care? We are faced with a symbol lost in time or a distant echo of stories even older than written memory. Perhaps, like so many other fragments of our distant past, the figures of Alubaid remind us that the history of humanity is much vaster, deeper, and stranger than we can imagine. From the arid lands of Mesopotamia, where reptilian figures are preserved, like fragments of a forgotten past, we now enter the green fields and forests of Central Europe. A serene, seemingly unchanging landscape, beneath which lies one of the most discreet and persistent enigmas of the Old World, the mysterious Erztal tunnels, stretching across Austria, Germany, Scotland, and other nearby regions. The Erztal tunnels form an underground network of narrow passageways, small chambers, and corridors so narrow that they barely allow a person to pass through. Excavated in rock or clay soils, these tunnels date, according to most estimates, from between the 1st and 11th centuries AD. However, their exact origin, purpose, and the logic behind their construction remain a mystery. The common features of the Erztals are as puzzling as they are consistent. They are not wide tunnels suitable for storing goods, nor are they comfortable shelters. They lack adequate ventilation outlets, obvious lighting systems, or signs of everyday use. In many cases, crawling on your knees or even crawling on all fours is required to move forward. Some galleries end abruptly in circular chambers. Others branch off in strange curves, as if obeying a design that is more symbolic than practical. Who built these tunnels, and for what purpose? Traditional archaeology offers several theories, but none is entirely satisfactory. Some suggest that they were emergency shelters, hiding places used during invasions or feudal wars. However, their narrow design and limited accessibility make it difficult to imagine that they could have housed entire communities or even small groups for long periods of time. Others propose a ritual purpose. Perhaps the tunnels were part of ancient spiritual practices, symbols of rebirth and transit between the world of the living and the afterlife. In fact, in many cultures, the act of passing through a narrow, dark space symbolizes the passage from one existence to another, a form of purification or rebirth. Some have gone further, speculating about an ancient underground communication system or even secret networks used by monastic orders, clandestine brotherhoods, or persecuted pre-Christian cultures. But if this was the case, why are there no written records? Why was their construction apparently left out of medieval documentation? And how is it possible that such laborious structures were excavated by hand without leaving clear traces of their function? The distribution of the Erztals does not help to solve the mystery either. Some are found near churches, castles, or medieval villages, but others appear isolated in the middle of fields that show no obvious signs of ancient settlements. It is as if they respond to a geographical logic that we can no longer decipher today. The construction methods also vary slightly from region to region, but the general pattern persists. Low tunnels, difficult to access passages, rounded chambers. This uniformity suggests a common purpose passed down from generation to generation or shared between disparate cultures. It was a forgotten initiatory practice, a spiritual need so profound that it drove people separated by hundreds of kilometers to create spaces for introspection in the very bowels of the earth. The passage of time has deteriorated many of the tunnels, collapsing them or burying them under new layers of civilization. The few that remain accessible, often hidden behind barns, rural houses, or dirt roads, retain an atmosphere charged with silence and expectation, as if the stones themselves still hold the echoes of ancient ceremonies, furtive footsteps, and extinct whispers. Entering a Erztal is a unique experience. The air thickens, the light disappears after a few meters, and the space compresses around the body. Everything invites introspection, abandonment of the outside world, a radical disconnection that was perhaps part of its original purpose. What drove medieval communities, in times of hardship and conflict, to invest so much effort in digging these underground labyrinths? What were they seeking to protect or achieve by venturing into the darkness of the earth? Today, the Erztals remain as silent scars beneath the fields of Europe. Little studied and little understood, they survive more out of the curiosity of independent archaeologists than through official research programs. Perhaps one day, new discoveries will allow us to understand their true meaning. Or perhaps, like so many other vestiges of human history, their mystery will remain unbroken, reminding us that beneath the calm surface of reality, there are always hidden worlds that resist oblivion. From the narrow, silent tunnels of Central Europe, we now turn to the fertile plains of the Balkans, on the banks of the Danube, where another, much older enigma lies hidden beneath layers of earth and centuries of oblivion. There, in the ruins of the Vincha civilization, we find signs that still whisper questions in the ear of time. The enigmatic symbols of Vincha. The archaeological site of Vincha, near present-day Belgrade in Serbia, reveals the remains of a sophisticated culture that flourished between 50 to 740-500 BC, long before the great civilizations of Mesopotamia or Egypt. While excavating its settlements, archaeologists found something surprising. Thousands of clay objects, figurines, pots, and tablets marked with engraved symbols. These were not mere decorations. The symbols followed repetitive patterns, combining in ways that suggested something more structured, perhaps a communication system, a proto-alphabet, or even humanity's first form of writing. Small cross lines, triangles, spirals, M', B', and X-shaped figures were carefully distributed across the surface of the objects. Some signs resemble characters from later scripts, such as Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs, but the Vincha symbols are much older, dating back thousands of years before the emergence of city-states in Sumer. What do these signs mean? Were they property marks, ritual symbols, accounting notes, or fragments of an articulate language that has been lost forever? Conventional interpretation suggests caution. Many researchers believe that the Vincha symbols do not constitute a true writing system, but rather a system of ritual or religious symbols without a structured syntax. Perhaps each sign represented a concept, a deity, or a natural event conveyed symbolically, but not linguistically. Others, however, are not so sure. The number of known symbols exceeds 700, and their combination into complex patterns suggests a considerable level of abstraction. Some experts, such as Maria Jambudas, have raised the possibility that we are looking at the vestiges of a pre-Indo-European matriarchal civilization, rich in myths and knowledge systems that were buried under subsequent migrations. Even more provocative is the idea, held by a few, that the Vincha civilization may have developed an early form of writing that simply did not have historical continuity, eclipsed by the later emergence of more structured cuneiform and hieroglyphic systems. If so, how many other systems of knowledge may have been born and disappeared without leaving lasting traces in the official narrative of history? The mystery deepens when we consider the geographical extent of the symbols. Similar inscriptions have been found, not only in Serbia, but also in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Bosnia, suggesting a broad, interconnected cultural sphere that encompassed much of southeastern Europe. What force united these scattered populations? What need drove them to engrave the same signs over and over again on objects that accompanied their daily lives and funeral rituals? Perhaps the Vincha symbols were more than just a lost language. Perhaps they were a visible expression of a belief system, of a way of seeing the world in which the boundaries between word, symbol, and object dissolved into a single sacred act. Today, the Vincha pottery fragments and clay tablets rest in museum display cases, silent witnesses to a time about which we know so little. Each sign, each line drawn by human hands more than 7,000 years ago, seems to invite us into a conversation that we can no longer fully understand. Each sign, each line drawn by human hands more than 7,000 years ago, seems to invite us into a conversation that we can no longer fully understand. Vincha, a world of forgotten priests and sages, an early experiment in the creation of complex communication systems, or simply the echo of a fundamental human impulse, the desire to leave a mark, to pass on something, an idea, an emotion, a memory, to those who would come after. Perhaps we will never decipher the true meaning of the Vincha symbols. Perhaps, like so many other traces of lost civilizations, their mystery is destined to remain a door ajar to a past we can only imagine. And in the meantime, the small inscriptions remain there, silent and persistent, reminding us that even at the dawn of human history, the urge to communicate with the invisible was already strong and silent in the hearts of our ancestors. From the ancient plains of Europe, where ancient engraved signs still seek to be deciphered, we now travel to the remotest confines of the southern hemisphere. In the cold, dark corridors of a forgotten cave in the mountains of New Zealand, another enigma awaits us, one that seems to defy the boundaries of time. The enigmatic story of the MO of Mount Owen. The setting is disturbing. Inside the cave of Mount Owen, hundreds of meters underground, beneath layers of compacted earth and debris swept away by centuries of neglect, a team of cavers was on a routine exploration in the late 1980s. They expected to find nothing more than rocks, scattered bones, and fragments of extinct life. But then, emerging from the damp gloom, they found something extraordinary. It was a mummified claw, perfectly preserved, with tissue and scales still attached to the bones. It did not appear to belong to an ancient fossil or a skeleton decomposed by time. It was so real, so tangible, that it seemed to come from a being that had lived or died only decades earlier. The find was soon identified as belonging to a MOA, a giant flightless bird that inhabited New Zealand until its extinction, according to official sources, around the 15th century. After the arrival of the first Polynesian settlers, the Maori, these birds, some of which reached 3 m in height and weighed more than 200 kilograms, dominated the island ecosystems for millennia. But here the first disturbing question arose. How could part of an animal that had been extinct for more than 500 years be preserved in such a state? What extraordinary conditions in that cave had allowed the preservation of soft tissue beyond what we would normally expect? The most rational explanations point to the extremely dry and cold environment. Inside the cave, capable of slowing down the decomposition process to an almost miraculous degree. But even so, Mountain's claw seems to be preserved in a state that is difficult to explain without imagining, at least for a moment, that the MOA could have survived much longer than we think. Could an isolated population of moas have persisted in the hidden valleys and vast unexplored regions of New Zealand, beyond the reach of the first settlers? Or even survived until much more recent times, disappearing silently without leaving any visible traces? It would not be the first time that natural history has been corrected by unexpected discoveries. The megatherium in South America, the coelacanth in Africa, a fish believed to have been extinct for 65 million years until its rediscovery in 1938. These are reminders that extinction is not always as absolute a process as we tend to imagine. What if the MOA of Mount Owen were not a mere archaeological remnant, but the echo of a hidden survival, unnoticed for centuries? Maori oral tradition also feeds this possibility. Stories passed down from generation to generation tell of huge birds hidden in the forests, of elusive presences that inhabited the shadows of the mountains. Were these legends mere memories of a lost past, or evidence of real encounters more recent than we think? Cautious scientists argue that there is no solid evidence of the survival of MOAs beyond the Middle Ages. Carbon-14 analysis applied to other fossil remains places their extinction around 1400 AD. And yet the mystery persists, because in every forgotten corner of our planet, in every hidden cave and unexplored valley, the possibility of the impossible still seems to beat. Today, the Mount Owen claw rests as a puzzling relic in the Canterbury Museum in Christchurch. Enclosed in a glass case, its hardened surface retains the texture of life as if it had been trapped in time, resisting the oblivion of the ages. Looking at it, one cannot help but wonder what other creatures, what other fragments of a vanished world still await discovery in the forgotten corners of the earth. Perhaps beneath the surface of our knowledge there are still stories that defy the straight lines of time, reminding us that the history of life, like secret tunnels and forgotten writings, is a map full of hidden paths we have not yet traveled. From the dark caves of New Zealand, where a fragment of the past challenges our certainties about extinction, we now travel to another of the most inhospitable and silent places on the planet, the Atacama Desert in Chile. under its relentlessly blue sky, in a land where life barely manages to cling to existence. A discovery emerged that from the very first moment sparked perplexity, controversy, and fascination. The enigma of the humanoid of Atacama, known as Ada, began in 2003 when, among the rubble of an abandoned church in the remote village of La Noria, a treasure hunter found something he did not expect. A tiny, mummified body in an astonishing state of preservation. It measured just 15 centimeters. Its skull was elongated, its bone structure anomalous, with incomplete ribs and an appearance that, at first glance, seemed closer to popular representations of an extraterrestrial being than to that of a human being. The creature, quickly nicknamed Ada, had characteristics that baffled even experts. The number and shape of its ribs, the proportion of its head to its body, the morphology of its limbs. It was too small to be a normal human fetus, and its bone development suggested a greater biological age, as if it had lived for several years. What exactly was ATA? The discovery sparked a wave of theories. Some independent researchers speculated about the possibility of an extraterrestrial being, a non-human biological entity, abandoned in a forgotten place on Earth. Others thought of failed genetic experiments, unknown mutations, or even ancient indigenous legends about tiny beings. The mystery deepened when the first DNA tests, carried out privately, yielded contradictory results, further increasing the aura of the inexplicable. Finally, in 2018, a team of scientists from Stanford University conducted a comprehensive genetic analysis. The results indicated that ATA was, in fact, human. Her DNA matched that of a woman of mostly Chilean descent. The physical anomalies were explained, according to the researchers, by rare genetic mutations that affected the development of her bones and tissues. ATA, they concluded, had suffered from an extreme combination of bone dysplasia, severe forms of dwarfism, and skull deformities. She was probably a fetus who died before or shortly after birth, abandoned or carefully placed in a location where the dry, stable desert climate preserved his body for decades. But even with this scientific explanation, many questions remain. How is it possible that such a small and seemingly fragile body could have been preserved in such perfect condition, in a remote location, without anyone claiming it? Why was it found in such a specific environment? In an area marked by legends of disappearances and a mining past shrouded in stories of suffering and exploitation. And even more, what do we really know about genetic mutations in isolated populations exposed for generations to extreme living and nutritional conditions? Some researchers, while accepting the human nature of ATA, point out that its existence reveals deep gaps in our knowledge of biological diversity, the extreme possibilities of life, and the fragility of the boundary we draw between the normal and the extraordinary. For others, the mystery transcends the genetic question. ATA has become a symbol of the forgotten, of the margins of history, of the fragments that escape our usual categories. A reminder that reality can be as strange, as deeply disconcerting as any fiction we can imagine. Today, ATA is no longer just an object of study. It is also a mirror that confronts us with our own limitations, our need to find immediate answers to questions that may require much more than science to be understood. The Atacama Desert continues to stretch out vast and silent under a seemingly unchanging sky, and in some corner of that immensity, the wind carries centuries of dust and secrets. Ada continues to ask us in its motionless silence, what other mysteries await us, hidden in plain sight in places where we least expect to look? From the endless sands of Atacama, where a tiny body defies the boundaries of biology and memory, we now move to another landscape dominated by dust and eternity, Egypt. There, beyond the pyramids, that defy the horizon and the tombs carved into the rock, lies one of the most forgotten but most disturbing mysteries of antiquity, the enigma of Egypt's lost labyrinth. On the shores of the Aguara Oasis, on the edge of the El Fayum Desert, It is said that there once existed a structure that the ancients described with reverential awe. According to the testimonies of historians such as Herodotus, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus, the Egyptian labyrinth was not a mere construction, but a true wonder of the ancient world. Herodotus, the famous Greek traveler of the 5th century BC, claimed to have seen it with his own eyes. According to his account, the labyrinth surpassed all known wonders in grandeur. It was a vast edifice composed of 12 covered courtyards, arranged in perfect order in thousands of interconnected rooms, both underground and at ground level. The walls, covered with inscriptions, the solid stone ceilings, and the endless corridors created an effect of confusion and amazement that, according to Herodotus himself, no other monument could match. And yet, today, nothing visible remains of the Egyptian labyrinth. What happened to this colossal work of architecture? Did it really exist, or was it a myth born from the imagination of ancient travelers? Some modern researchers believe that the stories are based on partially true realities. Excavations carried out in Jaguara in the late 19th century by British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie revealed the remains of a large stone platform, scattered fragments suggesting the existence of a monumental structure. Petrie concluded that the labyrinth had been destroyed during the Greco-Roman period, its stones looted to build new structures, its secrets buried under centuries of sediment and neglect. However, many elements remain unexplained. Why? If it was such a vast and complex structure, why have no other significant architectural remains been found? What kind of knowledge and organization were necessary to erect a building that, according to ancient accounts, rivaled the pyramids of Giza in magnificence? And above all, what was the purpose of a building deliberately designed to confuse, disorient, and conceal? Some theories suggest that the labyrinth was not just an administrative or funerary complex, but also a cosmic symbol, a material representation of the soul's journey through the realms of life and death. Each passage, each room could have corresponded to a stage of the spiritual transition, a test that had to be passed in order to attain eternity. Other researchers have proposed even more daring hypotheses. What if the labyrinth was not just a temple or a tomb, but an archive of ancient knowledge, a repository of texts, maps, and wisdom that Egyptian priests wanted to preserve in the heart of an inaccessible building, protected both by its architectural complexity and its sacred meaning? The possibility that unexplored chambers still lie beneath the sands of Jaguara, vestiges of that ancient labyrinth, has kept the fascination alive. Modern geophysical scanning projects have detected underground anomalies that could correspond to structures hidden beneath the sand. Vestiges of that ancient labyrinth has kept the fascination alive. Modern geophysical scanning projects have detected underground anomalies that could correspond to hidden structures, but administrative and archaeological obstacles have so far prevented exhaustive research. Meanwhile, the image of the labyrinth remains suspended between myth and history, an echo of endless corridors, secret chambers, and knowledge that perhaps should never have been revealed. What secrets could the subsoil of Aguara still hold? What stories? What revelations about humanity's remote past lie dormant beneath the layers of sand and oblivion? Perhaps the labyrinth of Egypt was never just a building. Perhaps it was and still is a perfect metaphor for the human quest, a journey through dark passages, closed doors, and enigmas that can only be solved by those willing to lose themselves in order to find something greater than themselves. There, under the relentless Egyptian sun, the earth still keeps its silence, and amid whispers of wind and dust, the lost labyrinth seems to wait for someone to one day try again to unravel its mystery. From the sands of Aguara, where the echo of a forgotten labyrinth still seems to beat beneath the earth, we now cross the vast ocean to an archipelago bathed in light and wind. In the remote Canary Islands, surrounded by the deep waters of the Atlantic, lies another mystery, the enigma of the Guanches, the ancient inhabitants of these volcanic lands. When the first European explorers arrived in the Canary Islands in the 14th century, they found a people who seemed to have come from another time. Robust in build, with fair skin in many cases and blonde or brown hair, the Guanches lived in primitive conditions, without writing, navigation, or advanced metallurgy. And yet, in their customs, their legends, and their carefully preserved mummies, there were echoes of a past much more complex than their present would suggest. Who were the Guanches really? Where do they come from? Archaeology has determined that the first human settlements in the Canary Islands date back to approximately 1000 BC. Although some evidence points to even earlier dates, it is believed that the Guanches were of Berber origin, peoples from North Africa who in ancient times crossed the dangerous waters of the Atlantic to colonize these isolated islands. However, the questions do not end there. How could populations without sophisticated maritime technology reach the islands in the first place? Were they helped by more advanced navigators? Or did they perhaps retain vestiges of ancient navigational knowledge that was lost over time? Their culture also presents some puzzling peculiarities. The Guanches mummified their dead using techniques that in some ways resemble Egyptian practices. They wrapped the bodies in goat skin, embalmed them to preserve them, and placed them in inaccessible burial caves. This complex funerary tradition, combined with their veneration of sacred mountains and their mythology about celestial gods, suggests a deep and articulated worldview, much more sophisticated than one would expect from a people isolated for centuries. Their architecture, although simple, showed a remarkable knowledge of their environment. Stone dwellings adapted to the terrain, caves converted into homes, collective structures that fostered social cohesion in an often hostile environment, and their legends, tales of struggles between good and evil, stories of gigantic beings, the Maxios who inhabited the islands before them, references to distant places submerged under the sea. It could be that the mythical heritage of the Guanches preserved a vague memory of more ancient times, of forgotten catastrophes, of forced migrations from lands now lost under the waters. Some researchers, carried away by these echoes, have linked the Guanches to the legends of Atlantis, a tempting hypothesis, although widely questioned by official science. Even so, the mystery remains. How can we explain the peculiar mixture of archaism and sophistication that characterized this people? The Spanish conquistadors, upon taking control of the islands in the 15th century, quickly decimated the Guanche population through war, enslavement, and disease. In a few generations, much of their culture disappeared. Today, only a few words survive in the vernacular, certain oral traditions, archaeological remains, and the silent mummies that rest in museums. But the questions remain. What knowledge? What stories? What secrets were lost with them? What ancestral impulse led their ancestors to launch themselves into the ocean and inhabit these fragments of volcanic land in the middle of nowhere? Perhaps, like so many other forgotten civilizations, the Guanches remind us that human history is neither linear nor simple, that every corner of the planet holds memories of migrations, cataclysms, rebirths, and oblivions that we are only beginning to glimpse. Under the immense skies of the Canary Islands, among the valleys of petrified lava and deep ravines, the echoes of those first inhabitants may still resound. An ancient whisper carried by the wind invites us to continue asking who the Guanches really were and what secrets of our collective past disappeared with them. From the volcanic ravines of the Canary Islands, where the echoes of the Guanches still seem to mingle with the wind, we now rise towards the misty skies of South America. There, on the vertiginous slopes of the Peruvian Andes, hidden among the perpetual fog and impenetrable jungles, lived the Chachapolas, the enigmatic people of the clouds. The region of the Chachapolas, in the present-day department of Amazonas, is not a friendly place. The mountains rise abruptly between deep valleys. Cliffs crumble into unfathomable abysses, and thick vegetation covers every inch of land. It is a world of dizzying heights and eternal mists, a landscape that seems made to hide secrets. In this inhospitable environment, the Chachapolas built a culture that still amazes us today. They built fortresses tombs, and cities on impossible ridges, such as Kulap, the impressive stone fortress that many call the Machu Picchu of the north. With walls reaching 20 meters high, huge blocks of stone fitted together with precision, and elaborate geometric decorations, Kulap speaks of a civilization capable of taming the most hostile geography. But who were the Chachapolas really? When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 10th century, they described the inhabitants of these lands as fair-skinned, tall people with light or reddish hair. These descriptions, recorded in chronicles such as those of Pedro Cieza de Leon, have fueled all kinds of theories for centuries. They were descendants of a lost people who had somehow arrived in the Andes from distant lands. The most widely accepted explanation is that the physical characteristics of the Chachapolas were simply a genetic variation within the local indigenous populations. However, the chronicles' insistence on highlighting their differences, combined with the remoteness of their territory, keeps speculation alive. Beyond their physical features, what is truly intriguing about the Chachapolas is their material culture and their relationship with death. They were expert builders of mausoleums that they erected on inaccessible cliffs, such as the famous sarcophagi of Corregia, anthropomorphic figures up to 2 m high, imposing and silent in appearance, guarding the entrances to their tombs hanging high above. Why choose such remote and dangerous places to lay their dead to rest? What deep meaning did it have for them to intertwine themselves in this way with the sky and the rock, suspended between life and the abyss? Some archaeologists suggest that the Chachapolas saw the heights as sacred places, points of connection between the world of the living and the ancestral spirits. Others imagine that the elevated mausoleums also served a practical purpose, protecting the sacred remains from the dampness of the ground and from looters. Whatever the reason, the construction of these funerary complexes, combined with the sophistication of their cities and the complexity of their pottery and textiles, reveals a rich, spiritual culture that was extraordinarily well adapted to its extreme environment. And yet, only fragments of their history remain. When the Inca Empire expanded northward in the 15th century, it encountered fierce resistance from the Chachapolas, but like so many other peoples in the region, they were eventually subjugated, their social structures dissolved, their identity absorbed into the Inca state apparatus. In turn, the arrival of the Spanish with their wars and diseases finished off much of their legacy. Today, the stone cities slowly crumble in the fog. The mausoleums are hidden behind vines and fallen rocks, and the last descendants of the Chachapolas live, scattered, their ancestral traditions almost lost. But is this really the case? Could it be that in some forgotten corner of these cloud-shrouded mountains, stories, symbols, or knowledge still survive, waiting to be rediscovered? What secrets do the forbidden heights of Kulap still hold? The sarcophagi, suspended over the void, the tombs hidden in inaccessible ravines, perhaps like the echo of their ancient chants traveling through the fog. The Chachapolas continue to remind us that history does not always reveal itself in straight and obvious lines. Sometimes, like the clouds that envelop their domain, the past hides and reveals itself in subtle ways, inviting us to look beyond the visible. From the cloud-shrouded heights of the Andes, where the remains of the Chachapolas defy gravity and time, we now descend to the vast, arid plains of the Middle East. Between the shifting borders of present-day Iran and the first Mesopotamian civilizations, a people flourished that today barely occupies a whisper in historical accounts. The enigmatic Elamite civilization. Elam, a name that seems to dissolve in the sands of time. And yet, more than 4,000 years ago, this culture was one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. Contemporary with Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, its capital, Susa, resounded with the bustle of markets, the echo of temples, and the murmur of diplomats and warriors. It was a place where the earliest forms of writing, architecture, and art wove a legacy that, paradoxically, has been shrouded in a veil of mystery. What do we really know about the Elamites? The remains that have come down to us, stone statues, cylinder seals, tablets inscribed in a script that has not yet been fully deciphered, tell us of a sophisticated and complex people. They had their own language, Elamite, a unique, isolated language with no known direct relatives in the rest of the ancient world. A language that still poses enormous challenges to linguists today. Where did the Elamites come from? How did this civilization emerge on the edges of the fertile lands of Mesopotamia? And why, despite its centuries of splendor, did its memory fade almost completely, swallowed up by the expansion of neighboring empires such as Babylon, Assyria, and Persia? The history of Elam is not linear. Its power rose and fell on multiple occasions. Sometimes they were conquerors, other times victims of devastating invasions. At their peak, the Elamite kings extended their influence over large areas of present-day Iran, establishing trade networks, alliances, and, on occasion, bloody campaigns against their western neighbors. One of the most celebrated and disturbing moments in their history occurred when the Helamites, after sacking the city of Uar, took with them the sacred statue of Nana, the Sumerian moon god, a symbolic act of humiliation and power that revealed the deep interconnection and rivalry between these ancient cultures. And yet, despite their power, the Helamites seemed to vanish into thin air. The reasons for their decline remain a subject of debate. They were gradually absorbed by the sunny Indo-European peoples who settled in the Iranian highlands. They were weakened by internal wars, natural disasters, or economic transformations that eroded their power base. Even more puzzling is the fragmentary nature of their written legacy. Unlike the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians, whose literature, religion, and administration have come down to us in tens of thousands of texts, Elamite inscriptions are scarce, fragmentary, and often cryptic. Was this scarcity the result of subsequent destruction by systematic campaigns of cultural erasure? Or did the Elamites, for reasons still unknown, fail to develop the same impulse for mass record-keeping that characterized other contemporary civilizations? Even their religion remains veiled. We know that they worshipped a number of deities, some shared with the Mesopotamian world, others exclusively their own, such as the god Inshushinak, protector of Susa. But the details of their mythologies, their rites, and their view of the cosmos elude us almost entirely. Today, the ruins of Susa and other centers, eroded by centuries of wind and neglect, barely hint at the grandeur of what once was. Broken steels, sun-baked bricks, fragments of incomprehensible writing, scattered traces of a people whose voice seems to have been silenced before it could be fully heard. Was Elam a civilization ahead of its time, whose legacy was cut short by the inexorable forces of history? Or was it part of a wider world of cultures now forgotten, whose echoes are only now beginning to emerge from dusty excavations? Perhaps the Helamites are not just a lost people, but a symbol of how fragile human memory can be, of how even the most sophisticated, most vibrant civilizations can be swallowed up by oblivion if their stories are not told, their voices not passed on. Meanwhile, in the silent valleys of ancient Elam, the wind continues to caress the broken stones, and amid whispers of sand, it seems to repeat a question we do not yet know the answer to. What secrets do the civilizations we have forgotten hold?